Okay, good evening. Let me call to order the regular City Council meeting for the City of St. Helena for Tuesday, April 25. Pledge of Allegiance, Mr. Ellsworth, would you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Here.
Vice Mayor White.
Here.
Councilmember Doring.
Here.
Ellsworth.
Here.
Koberstein. Here.
Okay, that takes us to public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address us with respect to matters not on our agenda, and comments limited to 3 minutes.
Peter Edlin, 1817 Main Street. Our property sits at the intersection of Main and Elmhurst. I'm here to protest the operation of the Los Alcabas Hotel operation, an operation that apparently was approved by the city without any consideration for employee parking. What's the result for the neighbors around the Los Alcabas Hotel is that we now have a de facto free private parking lot for the hotel's employees. It's been said that it's legal parking, and maybe we have as neighbors no right to protest the use of the parking by those employees, but I don't think that was the intent of having parking on the street, to have the parking be permanent to those employees. Now, the situation as it is now is not workable. I find it intrusive. More importantly, it's unsafe. You've got several situations that are close to the hotel that are going to eventually cause some damage to somebody. The first would be the Pratt and Main intersection, which has always been a challenge, but now it's going to be impossible. The second would be people exiting off of Elmhurst, going north or south. And even though the city recently put marked a red zone on the corners on both north and south sides of the Main and Elmhurst intersection for 25 feet, it's still not adequate. If you try to pull out onto Main Street going either direction, particularly if you're going south, by the time you've taken your gaze from looking north to see if a car is coming and start looking south and pull out, you've got somebody right up on your bumper. The problem is compounded by the fact that the traffic coming from the north is operating in a 35 mile per hour zone, and that zone is not applicable for that location any longer. The city should start pursuing reducing that mile per hour zone down to 25 from the tunnel of the Elms all the way down to where it does begin down by Madrona. For our own purposes on Elmhurst, trying to just exit my property, I cannot look to the west or the east for traffic coming up Elmhurst or traffic coming down to safely enter Elmhurst. Sooner or later, there's going to be an accident. So I want something done about this. And the hotel apparently has said to some people that, well, we were approved without it, there's nothing we have to do. If they don't want to be good neighbors, then I think the city has to start to take steps to get that parking back under its control. And I suggest that restrictions be imposed from a time standpoint so that they can't use the parking all day, or we institute some kind of a permit program so that residents can control who's parking around their own property. But the most important thing I'd like to see happen is have something done so we have some idea that the city is working on this for our behalf. And, my free parking, or my free speech just got eaten up. Anyway, it'd be nice to know that there's somebody trying to tackle this that we can approach on an occasional basis to see what's being done.
Ms. Smithies was taking notes. She's our Public Works Director. She's the person that was in charge of redlining the...
I've been pursuing speed on Elmhurst for years, and so...
good. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Allen.
Thank you.
Pat Dale, 25 San Juan Court. A couple of months ago, we had a goal-setting session for the citizens who live in St. Helena, or residents who live here. During that goal-setting session, when it came to the City Council, The only thing the mayor seemed interested in was the Chamber of Commerce's PBID proposal, and something that I suggested should be a goal, and that is to get the general plan done. I don't know what's going to happen with the PBID proposal. My prediction is that it will fail, but the general plan has to be done. And I think we need to have a report at every city council meeting and every planning commission meeting telling us how many more weeks it's going to take. And I think if Noah needs to be relieved of some of his duties, then I guess the city manager would do that. I don't know how you do it. I just know that just like Mr. Trump is almost at the end of his 100 days and he would like to chalk up some, accomplishments, I would think the city council would like to begin to write down some accomplishments that happened during their term. And that would be a great accomplishment to start with. Thank you.
All right. I'm sure Mr. Hausch can comment on
Thank
that
you.
when we get to staff reports. Good.
Hi, Debbie Fradlizio. My daughter Jennifer and I own Gilwoods on 1313 Main Street. I am not here for my sewer bill. I'm here for another problem. Gilwoods Cafe was robbed Saturday night, early Saturday morning. And wonderful, very nice police officer came out. He was there for a very short period of time, did very little, and pretty much told us it's an inside job. One of your employees did it. We can't do anything about it. So not only did Jennifer and I feel pretty defiled by being robbed, but then all of a sudden it's one of our employees who, since we took over Gilwoods 4 years ago, their family, they've all been with us. We've never lost anyone. So we were devastated and freaked out. So then my husband, luckily, Michael, came in and calmed us down, and we did a full inventory. We went through the restaurant, itemizing where things were taken, what areas were taken, and after a couple hours we realized it was not an employee, not by what was taken, but what wasn't taken. The very expensive things, very areas that our employees would only know about that weren't touched. So then my husband went out to we were out looking at the parking lot, and there was some of the items were on the parking lot, so we started looking around, looked in trash cans, and the wine center had 2 of the containers those things were in the garbage can. So the police officer said he couldn't take any fingerprints because there was too many fingerprints. So we called him up and said, hey, there's these containers in the garbage can. Can you come check those out? He did come back. He did tell my husband later on that he found a partial print and put it in the system, but we haven't heard anything. I also asked him if he could check with Oak Avenue Catering, used to be Knickerbockers, because sometimes they come back late from parties. I assume he went over and did that. My husband then took it on upon himself to walk down Money Lane. He looked at all the businesses that had cameras, took down their names, called the police officer back and said, hey, there's 6 cameras on Money Lane. Have you asked any of those businesses if they have any footage? The officer said he didn't know about the cameras on Money Lane. My husband said, well, should we contact them? And he said, no, I'll contact them. Monday morning, Michael went back to the police department and asked to speak to the police officer to find out that he was gone for the week for training. And he asked if there was anybody else could help him, and he was told no. So he went down Money Lane, and graciously, all our neighbors were very helpful. Anybody that had a camera let him look at the footage. No police officer had been there, no one had asked him for anything. He did find some footage on some different things that were going on. But the reason I'm here is because during that investigation, he found out that 2 of the businesses in my neighborhood have also been robbed recently. They were also had a lack of support from the police department, and they were also told, as we were, that you should have had cameras. I'm going to go over, I'm sorry. You should have had cameras. The reason I'm here is because, the businesses in St. Helena struggle. We struggle. And the money we bring in also brings in the sales tax you so necessarily need. That extra 0.5%, we're getting that for you. Without us, you don't get that. And we feel like we need some support from the police department and the city. Wait a minute, let me finish because I'm very nervous, I'm sorry. So the reason I'm here is because I want to know why, as a business, I was not told, hey, there's a couple of businesses that had been robbed. And hey, the city recommends you all have cameras. Because we didn't have cameras because we were worried our customers would feel intruded upon. We thought our employees might not feel like we trusted them. But if somebody from this city or the police department would have come to me and said, hey, we've had some issues, we think you should have cameras, I would have got cameras. Because before all the money we could have bought 6 or 7 camera systems. So I'm just really disappointed in this city that they don't. And I don't know why the city doesn't have cameras all over the place. There's no police. You know, the cameras that they watched, the police went down Money Lane one time. That's a dark alley.
Right, the
one time.
police chief is listening to you. Can you complete your remarks, please?
Yes. So I just want to say that this city needs to support the businesses, and one of the ways is we need more police, or we need people you need to be telling us what's going on. There's a Nextel system that Calistoga and Napa uses for alerts all the time. You could use that. It's free to the city and the police department. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure the police chief
Thank
was
you.
listening with interest here. Okay, further public comment? Yes.
One more. My name is Tom Thornton, 1505 Stockton Street in St. Helena. A couple of months ago, I came up with an idea for a public arts project on Adams Street and Library Lane, and I brought together 2 St. Helena institutions, the RLS Middle School, the art students there, and the RLS Museum, of which I'm a trustee, and we came to you about a month ago and got approval for this public art project here featuring Robert Louis Stevenson. And the reason I'm here today is just to thank the council and the mayor for approving this for us. It's been a great success. A lot of support for this public arts feature. I have a request today. The school nor the museum had the funds to do this project, and there was enough excitement about it that I ended up paying for all the expenses out of my pocket. And one of those expenses was the permit fee for this from the city, and was wondering, I paid that permit fee of $558 because it was categorized as a sign. Even though it's not selling anything, it's more of a piece of art. And my request is whether I could get a retroactive waiver on that permit fee just to help keep the expenses of this down, because I think the value that this presents to the community might equal that.
All right, well, that's an issue to take up with the city manager. He's listened to you, and yes, he'll get back to you.
Okay? Thank you
very much.
Nodding his head, too.
Any further public comment?
So far, we're batting .250.
Hello, my name is Mike Quaglia. I'm representing my father, Raymond Quaglia, who owns the property on the northeast corner of Pratt Avenue and Highway 29. I echo the sentiments of Mr. England. I see the parking out on Main Street, and I understand his frustration. I also have a parking problem with the newly installed vineyard that we have directly across the street from the Los Alcobos Hotel. Basically, they've left my property unfarmable due to parking, the lack of employee parking. As I look back on some of the stuff, I mean, this project was approved. It was also an approved expansion. And the city basically failed to ensure adequate parking for the site up there. Now what we see is hotel patrons actually wheeling their bags across Highway 29 now to go up there. Even though they have valet parking, they don't want their vehicle landlocked in there. They want to be able to get to it when they want to get to it. So now we have that problem. So my request is that, since I would still like to farm the property, since we've had the property for quite a few years, that no parking signs be installed on the would be the north side of Pratt Avenue from Highway 29 down to the Behringer entrance. This would be a huge inconvenience to us and our family as well, but I cannot be playing parking enforcement. Yesterday morning, I went over and saw my father. I left to go to work and actually caught somebody out there using Vineyard as a restroom. So, and I'm sure I'm going to be left to clean that up. So anyway, that's what's going on over there. I'm all for business. I'm all for the transit occupancy tax. I know the city needs it. However, the flip side is you've impacted the lives of the people that have lived over there for years in a way you have no idea. I invited the council to come down and stand on the high corner of 29 and Pratt if they so braved. I hope some of you took the opportunity to go out there and take a look at the mess. Okay, so there is a serious problem going on over there, and as Mr. England said, yeah, I understand. He doesn't want cars in front of his house either. He wants to be able, when his friend comes over, he wants to be able to park in the front yard. I mean, that's kind of what we assume we have when we buy a piece of property, unless you buy it with something existing there already with the problem. So please, I'm asking the help of the city council to, install no parking signs there. I've tried to work with the owners up there. I mean, they can't be out there doing parking control either. They've seemed somewhat diligent. However, it's a problem. So any help I could get from the council would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, any further public comment?
Excuse me, Mike Griffin, Park Street. Go along with Mr. Guaya's issues there on Pratt Avenue. We have the same on Park Street, and I'd encourage you maybe, I don't want you to just put no parking signs on Pratt Avenue, but maybe a 2-hour limit or something, because what we're having now is all the workers at Las Culpas, they work all through the night, they come down on their breaks, sit there, listen to radio in their car in front of my house, eat their lunch, whatever the case may be, and a lot of times they just leave their garbage right in front of my house. So I think if we can encourage the city, I put a call in the Public Works Department over a month ago to come out and meet with me, and never even got a response back, a phone call or anything on the issues of the painting the curbs red on Park Street. All of a sudden, they just mysteriously popped up on Elmhurst because there was a problem there. The problem on Park Street and Pratt Avenue has been that way for 2 years now, with the workers and now the employees at Las Culpas. So I think maybe in the Park Street area, make a 2-hour parking to where their workers can't park there, and maybe they'll come down and park at City Hall. I don't know, but we're getting fed up with it. We pay, we vote you people in or whatever the case may be, and we don't get nothing done. So we're fed up with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? All right, let me close public comment, and that takes us to reports by staff and city council, future agenda items, and AB 1234 reports. And so let me begin with the city manager.
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Brown? Ms. Mitz, you've got things coming up, but
everybody always knows I have something to say. Thank you very much. There's 2 big meetings that are coming up. The first is tomorrow. We are having another one of our ad hoc committee meetings for the utility rate study, and it is tomorrow at 2:00 at our firehouse. We did not put an end time on it because we didn't want to be constrained, because tomorrow we are having our 3 consultants that we've hired, Hansford Economic Consulting, David Fama, who is a bond counsel, and Kenneth Deeker, who's a municipal finance advisor. So we do have a series of questions that have been proposed, and they are going to be doing a question and answer session with the ad hoc committee meeting. So that, again, tomorrow, 2:00 at the firehouse. And the other large meeting we're having is next Tuesday, so it's May 2nd, from 9 a.m. to approximately 4 p.m., and it is our first budget hearing, and it will also be at the firehouse. So we'll go from 9 to 4, and we'll have about an hour break for lunch in the middle of that.
okay. Ms. Black?
Just to let council know, I'm going to be starting the recruitment for terms of boards, commissions, and committees expiring terms. So we'll be seeing flyers coming out, and I'll look to all the council members to please disperse the flyers and help get interest in the community.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smithy?
I just wanted to address a couple of public comments. We are continuing to monitor the situation, the parking situation on Main Street and the side streets, Pratt and Elmhurst and Park. I may have overlooked a phone call, and I apologize if I was gotten a call a month ago. Sometimes I get calls. We don't have the system yet where we get voicemails to our computers that also have caller ID, but we're looking at getting that in the near future. So that'll help me, or help all staff, I think, respond to calls. But the no parking signs along Pratt we'll definitely take a look at. And Elmhurst parking, we just got the police chief spoke this morning at exec staff meeting about maybe increasing some of the no parking zones and looking at Elmhurst a little bit more thoroughly with line of sight distance. And I remember my first conversation with Peter from 1317 Elmhurst and about the speeding issue on Elmhurst, and we did put in the budget that's not approved yet probably some permanent radar signs. There's a couple locations on city streets that we're looking at putting radar signs, and that's included in our budget that's going to the budget hearings next week. So we can track data on speeding and other issues in that area. And please call me again, and I'll call you back about Park Street and see what we can do there. But,
and what about the issue of trying to lower the speed limit on Highway 29 from 35 to 25?
I'll need to
the
look.
New development. Is that possible with Caltrans to work with them on that?
I'll look into it.
Okay, good. I think that's a very fine suggestion. Mr. Hausch?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and the public. In response to Ms. Dell's comments, I did give a brief update on the general plan status at last Planning Commission's meeting a week ago. However, to respond directly, obviously our department's been significantly impacted by some staff changes, which has required my attention to focus on administration work in the building department and some of the contract work that's resulted in recent approval of some of the affordable housing projects that we have moving forward. Those were previously being managed by City Manager Phillips. However, when she departed, given my background and understanding of those issues, we determined that it was more efficient for me to focus on those rather than try to ask Mr. Pinnell to catch up to speed, especially given the numerous other issues that he's had to focus on. But that has impacted my ability to meet my April target for the general plan EIR. However, I am spending a significant amount of my time on it and do anticipate being able to get a document out on the street for public review and comment shortly. I don't have an accurate time frame for that currently. I don't want to provide a time frame that I can't meet. And the issue is essentially because there's been so much time taken to get the document up to date and on the street. A lot of the studies that were previously done have been updated, and so now I'm having to go back and make sure all the current references are not only accurate and up to date, but include the most recent information. So it is somewhat time-consuming process. But Ms. Dell, if you want to give me a call, I'd happy to give you more specific information on it than is appropriate for a staff briefing in the public hearing.
Okay, very good. Chief and Bowden?
I just want to let everybody know that during the Earth Day on Saturday, the police department collected 2 30-gallon garbage cans full of expired unused medication that the community dropped off. They used the new kiosk, which worked perfectly, and filled it up. We emptied it. They filled it again. We emptied it. They filled it again. So that's 60 gallons worth of medication that didn't go down the drain, didn't go into the water system. So we appreciate everybody dropping that off as part of the Earth Day movement on Saturday. And I just want to let everybody know that we have had some burglaries in town. The restaurant was one, and I'm not going to get into the issues that you discussed because it is an open investigation, but I would like to let everybody know that it is being investigated. We also have had some residential burglaries in town, and so I'd like to remind people to lock their doors and windows at night and when they're not at home, because the ones that we have had recently have been through open doors and open windows. One of those, the burglar was still in the house when the homeowner came home. So fortunately, that person took off and there was not a confrontation. We didn't have an issue beyond somebody's house being burglarized, but that's a risk that you run. Unfortunately, nowadays when you leave your doors and windows unlocked. So I'd like to remind everybody to lock your doors and windows when you're not there and at night. And we will continue to investigate your burglary as well as the residential ones. And when we have some resolution and somebody that we can point the finger at, we'll take action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Bowden. Ms. Crichton? Not at this point. Okay. Am I missing anybody else out there? All right. Ms. Koberstein?
I have a couple things. I would like us to consider having a joint meeting with the Planning Commission in the future, not too distant future. And maybe we could do it by starting one of our own meetings an hour early. But I think they would like to hear from us what our goals are for the Planning Commission for the coming year. I think we should also talk about process with them and some issues. I myself have raised the question of whether we should start to institute a pre-application conference, and I'd like to hear their views, and I think they would like to talk with us. So I hope we can put something like that on the agenda soon. Second, this is my own little personal crusade. Those of you who are getting to know me, I think, know that one thing I cannot stand is mountains of paperwork. And I think I'm going to take it upon myself to see what I can do to help us reduce unnecessary paper and information so that we can make better decisions. So I want to read you a little something from Sir Winston Churchill, August 9th, 1940, which he sent to his war cabinet about brevity. To do our work, we all have to read a mass of papers. Nearly all of them are far too long. This wastes time, while energy has to be spent looking for essential points. I ask my colleagues and their staff to see to it that their reports are shorter. The aim should be reports which set out the main points in a series of short, crisp paragraphs. Sounds just like Churchill, doesn't it? If a report relies on detailed analysis of some complicated factors or on statistics, these should be set out in an appendix. Basically, my point is, I hope we can improve our communication, both written and oral. I think a lot of the frustration that's occurring lately with some of our hearings and meetings is just the mountains of material. And if we can work together to find a way to improve it, I think it would help us all. That's it.
Okay, good. Mr. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I've got a couple things. First of all, I wanted to bring up the burglaries and robberies and just remind everybody to lock their doors and lock their car. I went out last night, realized I hadn't locked my car, and I think we get in the habit of that here in St. Helena. So as this sort of goes forward, just everybody making sure that they're doing everything they can. I think the Los Alcobas parking situation is terrible and needs to be addressed in a long-term way very, very soon. Yes, we can get some short-term solutions to maybe create a little space that we can think of a long-term solution, but it's not fair to the people who live there in that area. They've been patient for 2 years with this construction, and for this to now be extended like this is not fair. It's also a safety issue that's starting to encroach towards the school. So I think it needs to be, we need to sit down with the hotel and whoever else, to help find a long-term solution that's going to be pleasant for everybody, because what's happening now is too much unrest for the people who live there, and and we have to figure out a better solution soon. The next thing is I'm putting together a report. It should be ready at the end of the week. I think we need an urgent program to help subsidize the businesses who are facing the very large wastewater base rate change. I'm talking to other cities like Carmel and Auburn who have programs that adjust for the size of a restaurant based on square footage, based on flow, based on seating. I've been directed to the water board, the regional water board. Carmel area said they use a model that the California State Water Board has. So I'll have that by the end of the week, and I think we need to really seriously sit down. The stress, the collective stress on this many businesses in this small an area having to bear this load, I believe is undoable. So I think we need to address that right away. I got a few responses on this winemaking idea that I put out there. I'll have that report in about a week. And then finally, this Saturday, there's going to be what's called a healing walk from Yountville to Napa. and many people around the county who have been facing imbalances in their neighborhoods, in their areas, issues like deforestation, issues like urbanization of our rural areas, will be meeting in Yountville at Veterans Park on the south end at 8:30 in the morning, and we'll be walking from Yountville to Napa. Some people will be carrying signs, and we are trying to bring awareness to the fact that many people in Napa County are facing encroachment on what they believe is their right to a peaceful existence here. So that's 8:30 in Yountville at Veterans Park on Saturday, this Saturday.
Okay. Mr. Doran?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have nothing.
Mr. White?
Have one happy announcement that the NVTA did approve our application for the OBAG 2, which is possibly $1.3 million for our sidewalk improvements. And if anybody's interested, on the NVTA website there is an actual schedule of which is not very well. It is promising because it is a schedule for when we will actually get those funds, which will be around 2019. Yes, construction in 2019. So anyway, 1.3 million is nothing to scoff at. And thank you, staff. As Mark Joseph, one of the council members from American Canyon, said at our meeting, he was thanking the TAC, which is the Technical Advisory Committee, which Erica is one of the members of, and so is Tracy from time to time, that they worked it out among the public works directors so we wouldn't have to fight over it. So that was very helpful. Thank you.
I might add here that our vice mayor is the chair of the NVTA. That's a good position to be in when these opportunities come through, and I want to thank the vice mayor for his effort in helping us get this important grant. It does require some matching funds, but clearly it's important that we accept the grant and move forward with it. It will help us a lot. I'm very pleased myself that it's come out in our favor. The only other point that I would add is with respect to Earth Day, just to thank city staff that participated at Earth Day. I think we had just about the same participation at Earth Day this year that we had last year in terms of the number of cars that came through and brought their materials, paints, etc., medicines, and so on for drop off. And also we had the city had its water conservation tent up, and we managed to give out a lot of materials as well. So it was a good effort by the city, and I really appreciate it. So thank you. Okay, that takes us to presentations and public recognitions, and we have one. And let me ask the library director and any and all others who wish to come up. Hi, Mari. This is for National Volunteer Week, and so we have our volunteers here. So, National Volunteer Week, April 23 through 29, 2017. Whereas the entire community can inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes the world, and whereas individuals and communities are at the center of social change, discovering their power to make a difference, and whereas the giving of oneself in service to another empowers the giver and the recipient, and whereas our country's volunteer force of over 61 million is a great treasure, and whereas volunteers are vital to our future as a caring and productive nation, and now, therefore, be it proclaimed that I, Alan Galbraith, Mayor for the City of St. Helena, do hereby proclaim April 23 through 29, 2017 National Volunteer Week in St. Helena. In so doing, I urge my fellow citizens to volunteer and help to renew and sustain the St. Helenian spirit by committing themselves to address the needs of our community through voluntary action. So, let me award this to... Just briefly?
Yeah, we will.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I get a little bit nervous, so watch me and tell me if I start speaking Spanish suddenly. I made a little note in here. So good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Mari Martinez, and I am the Outreach Services Librarian from the St. Helena Public Library, your neighbor. And with me tonight, I have two awesome volunteers representing. We actually have more than 20 volunteers now, but with us, Terrence Aldevar and Leah Doringay. So one of the, among the many things that I do, I have the honor to work coordinating volunteers. So I have the pleasure to work with volunteers every day, and they help us deliver the highest quality of library services possible. And I must highlight with that last year, 2016, volunteers donated to the library 1,306 hours. That is a lot. And these volunteers serving the library, they serve the community of St. Helena. And these volunteers, they have different ages, different skills, and most of them, a lot of them, come from out of town too. So it's very important to recognize that people love St. Helena. And I also want to say that on behalf of the staff of the library, I want to thank the council and the residents for this very important recognition and appreciation of volunteerism in our city. And I would like to end with introducing you to a very strong community partner of the library and the city, Rianda House, who will also like to thank the council and the residents and their volunteers. They have very wonderful volunteers that we also share between the library and so forth. So I would like to introduce you to them. Thank you. And I'll keep this
Thank
here.
you, Maureen.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I won't break into Spanish, but I'm still nervous. I'm Julie Spencer. I'm the director at Rianda House, and like the library and many of the other nonprofits in town, we can't do what we do without our fabulous volunteers. When you come to Rianda House, they're going to greet you when you walk in. When you call and you need a resource, they're going to help you find that resource. They're going to teach a class. Maybe it's an exercise class or a history class or current events. They're going to help with the fundraiser. They help us in so many different ways, including our board of directors are all volunteers. Like the library, there's countless hours. I think ours racked up to 1,900 hours last year of volunteers, and we have about 73 people on our volunteer team. The first 5 years at Rianda House, it was me and just volunteers to make what we do for the community possible. So we really applaud the library taking the lead in this. Thank you, Mari, for doing that. And we're delighted to be a resource for volunteers to give back to the community, because as much as they give to us, they get something in return. So we're pleased to be a part of that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you.
Very good. You're going to capture that?
Yes.
All right. So that takes us to our consent calendar. 8.1 is consideration of proposed approval of regular meeting minutes of March 14th, 2017. The clerk provided me with a modestly amended copy for the meeting. The amendments are just before what is 8.4, where it says Vice Mayor White moved to remove. It should say Vice Mayor White moved to remove low-medium residential use designations. It's a typo correction there. And then with respect to the item dealing with the Hillport, it was added in that Mayor Galbraith recused himself due to conflict and left the meeting room. So those are the two changes with respect to 8.1. With respect to 8.2, which is consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving an employment agreement with Erica Almond Smithies and ratifying the city manager's appointment to serve as the city public works director, state law requires me to read the following in violation of Ms. Cobertine's admonition to be succinct. So just bear with me. It's a requirement of state law imposed on me. As required by newly enacted California Code Section 54953C3, the following is a summary of the recommended final action on the salary schedules, and fringe benefit compensation for the city's executive employees. The proposed resolution included with Agenda Item 8.2 includes the following provisions related to the compensation for the proposed new Public Works Director. Salary. The proposed contract begins on April 25, 2017, and provides for salary payment on Step B of the Public Works Director salary schedule, currently $146,576. Next bullet point, fringe benefits. The proposed contract provides the same leaves and fringe benefits as provide other department heads. These benefits are set forth in the city's unrepresented compensation program. The major provisions include city payment of the full cost of medical, dental, and vision insurance premiums for the employee and dependents' short-term disability insurance and a $50,000 life insurance policy and use of a city vehicle, but no automobile allowance, And then pension benefits. The proposed contract provides that the Public Works Director is a Tier 2 Classic member, 2% at 60, and is required to contribute the total, quote, employee contribution, end quote, and any applicable cost-sharing requirements applicable to city department heads as set forth in the unrepresented compensation program, currently 1% cost sharing. The city will pay its required contribution after this cost sharing. Again, that's required by state law.
I had one other clarification, if I could, Mr. Mayor, with regard to Erica's employment agreement. The attached staff report from me is accurate and correct. Section 4C reflects a 2-month severance. That's not what we had agreed to. It should be consistent with the staff report, a 3-month severance. That's Section 4-C.
Okay, so we'll take that into account, 3 months. So that will be deemed an amendment to 8.2. 8.3, council consideration and possible approval of a resolution reiterating the City of St. Helena's commitment to complete the project for the removal of the York Creek Dam by the end of 2018. 8.4, pardon? Okay. .4, consideration of proposed approval of a resolution approving a request for waiver of use permit planning, application fee, and building permit fees not to exceed $10,800 for the St. Helena Fire Department's application for the St. Helena Department Station Number 2 at 1025 Dowdell Lane.
I'd like to pull that, please.
8.5, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving a sole source purchase for one-channel monster wastewater grinder from JWC Environmental in an amount not to exceed $32,000 and authorize the finance director to execute a budget transfer of $32,000 from wastewater reserves. 8.6, receive and file grant quarterly report for fiscal year 2017, third quarter for the period ending March 31st, 2017. Who was that? Pat. Oh, Ms. Dell, okay. 8.7, consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving the SHES/SHPS parent-teacher group to host musical entertainment and vendors at Lyman Park on Friday, May 5th between the hours of 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. and waive the encroachment permit fee in the amount of $200 and authorizing city staff to assist with the setup and tear down of equipment. 8.8, consideration of proposed adoption of a resolution designating no parking zones on Elmhurst Avenue and Main Street.
I'd like to pull that.
8.9, consideration of proposed approval of resolutions. 1, authorizing a budget adjustment of $6,908 to account number 101-4100-2405 for the amount owed for the low-income subsidy for fiscal year 2016-17, quarter 3. Of this amount, $2,423.55 will be transferred to the Water Fund revenue account, and $2,343.23 will be transferred to the Wastewater Fund revenue account. And then 2, authorizing a transfer from account 101-4000-2408 leak adjustments to account number 561-3470-0000, other revenue for the amount owed for leak adjustments in fiscal year 2016-17 totaling $1,367. So with that, the chair would entertain a resolution approving consent items 8.1, 8.2, 8.5, 8.7, and 8.9.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ms. Black?
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Doring?
Yes.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Coberstein?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. All right, that then takes us back to 8.3, council consideration and possible approval of resolution reiterating the City of St. Helena's commitment to complete the project for the removal of the Upper York Creek Dam by the end of 2018. And the staff person on this one is Ms. Smithies.
Yes, this is just a staff resolution that is just this good government, just showing that we're moving forward with the Upper York Creek dam removal. We're in 65% design plan phase. We're moving forward with submitting permit applications to regulatory agencies in early May. So we stay on schedule and get out to construction next May so we can meet our grant obligations. And that's about it on the project. I think everyone's well versed that this project's been ongoing and required since 1993.
Okay, Mr. Bell?
I have a comment on it, too.
Yeah, we're going to open the public hearing. Yeah, sure. So who would like to speak at public hearing on this one?
Thank you very
Good.
much. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I read the resolution, Erica, and I don't know if you wrote it or not, but I have a couple of comments about the choice of words. And I don't know whether it makes any difference or not, but I personally found it difficult to understand how you could consider us progressing with diligence when it's taken us 25 years to get it done. So it's a small issue, but I would like to see that changed. And then on the third paragraph, it says the city has been working for several years. I think it should reflect 24 years that we've been working on it. And then on the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the sixth paragraph, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct, that the city has been paying a fine of $70 a day since December 1st of 2009?
No, that's not correct.
Are okay?
Yeah, I can't remember when the fine kicked in. It might have kicked in about 2012, but not 2009.
Well, I would like the city to look into that because I have records that show it was started in 2010, and I have the December 1st, 2009 date. So I might be wrong, but I would like to have that checked.
All right.
Let's see. I have a question on the second page on the third paragraph where it talks about the last sentence, the 1.695775 remainder is currently planned to be funded from estimated cash reserves in the water enterprise. And looking at the capital improvement projects I believe it's in 2017 and might be 2023, we have about $500,000 or $600,000 that's also planned to be spent on the restoration of York Creek, which is part of the obligation to remove the dam. And I don't see that number reflected in the 1.695775. So I would like to see the city look at that too, as far as the capital improvement projects. And other than that, those are the only comments I have to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Ms. Burnett?
Hi, I'm Bobby Monana speaking as a resident. And I was just thinking on the 10th whereas at the last sentence, because out of respect for and honoring of the public comment in the last couple of months and the ad hoc committee, I was just wondering if it might be prudent to add after it says, then the last sentence, after the St. Helena Water Enterprise, if you just add, if other funding cannot be found. Because if this is a resolution, then I don't know how written in stone it is, but it seems that would acknowledge at least the request for an effort to find other funding. Whether or not it can be found is not known, but I think that's something that the ad hoc committee is working on. So I thought if that were included in the language, that might be sensitive to the public in that committee. So thank you.
I would support that additional language.
Okay. Is there any further public comment? All right, let me close the public comment and invite any further discussion. With respect to the $70 a day, that was in the settlement agreement with NOAA, and I'm quite confident that this date is correct of October 31st, 2012, because the settlement with NOAA was in 2010, 2011, and it then had a date for the removal of the dam and then a date for the penalty to start if we didn't have the dam removed, and that looks right to me. With respect to with diligence, we are progressing with diligence. I tend to agree with you, Mr. Belt, that we did not proceed with diligence in the past, but I think this resolution is today saying that today we're progressing with diligence, and I do think that's truthful. So I think that can and should stand the way it is. Now, I missed out on
24 years instead of several.
I don't think that's fair, quite frankly. Certainly, we were ordered or agreed to an order in 1993 with the Department of Fish and Game to remove the dam. Some time went by, and then the city said, hey, if we're going to get grant funds, we can't do it with this order in place, and folks agreed to remove the order. But I don't think it's fair to say that been working continuously for all that period. It's been off and on, but certainly for the last several years we've been trying to get it done since the 2011 rate increase. So to me, the language that's in here is fair.
Can I make a comment to that comment?
No, I think we've closed the public comment. I also don't think it matters too much. Any other comment here?
I think just to add in the if other funds cannot be found.
Sure, I don't have any problem with that.
I think that's fine.
I'd like to tweak that a little bit.
Of course. You're on the ad hoc committee.
Well, a liaison.
I would propose that the last sentence read that the $1,695,775 remainder is planned to be funded from estimated cash reserves in the water enterprise or other available city funds.
Well, to me, if other funding cannot be found, says it. I don't know what is meant by other city funds.
Well, the general fund would be one other place.
I don't see myself that the general fund should be tapped for this purpose. But I've said that many times in the past.
I think that just Mary's suggestion is leaving that discussion open, making sure the resolution is written so that the discussion on the funding is still open.
All right.
I would accept Mary's amendment. I think it's fine. I think it is an open question on whether it is appropriate to use general fund monies because others disagree with you, Mayor. So we'll just leave the question open until it gets resolved.
That way we don't have to pass another resolution.
All right, fair enough.
What's
So,
paper?
Okay.
Exactly your wording
That
again.
punctuates diligence.
Okay. Give me your wording again, please.
It is, strike the word currently. The remainder is planned to be funded from estimated cash reserves in the water enterprise or other available city funds.
All right. Okay, have you got the changes, Ms. Black?
Just to clarify, so we're striking the word currently.
Right.
And at the end, just or other city funds.
Other available city funds.
Other.
Right. I guess that's the only change one.
I'll move approval.
Second.
All right, Ms. Black?
Councilmember Doring?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth?
Yes.
Coberstein?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, that takes us to 8.4. Thank you. This is the fire chief. Is he here tonight?
Mr. Sorensen had a previous engagement. I agreed to fill in for him on this item as I'm somewhat familiar with it.
Okay, good.
I don't really need a staff report. I just want to go on record as saying that, in my view, this seems a little bit premature because I just want to go on record as saying that by voting for this, I'm not necessarily voting for whatever the plan is, the station, because I haven't had enough detail. So I don't want it to be implied that by saying, well, this fee will be waived, that somehow that gives the message that some ultimate plan will be approved, at least by me, because I don't know exactly what the details of that plan are. And that was the reason I pulled it. It seemed a little premature, but I understand you have to start somewhere. So I get that.
Yeah, I don't believe that was the intention to characterize any support for a fee waiver as indicating support for a project. It's all general fund money. So whether the fire department pays the planning department and then it goes back into the pool, it's all coming from and going to the same source. And so that's why the fire department chose to request that the council waive this. The planning department's supportive of it. And as you mentioned, this would be allow the fire department to request approval for a use permit to modify a property which is located at 1025 Dowdell to gain use permit approval in order to use that as a second station to provide fire service in response to some of the growing demands of the public, and also maintaining response times in light of some of the traffic increases and other issues that they've been addressing.
Right. And I appreciate the comment, and it's well taken. I just would signal to the chief that I'm going to need alternatives, specific data on the response times and how they are to be improved by this, the cost on an annual basis, whether budget issues in terms of whether this is budgeted already or needs to come out of reserves, those kinds of things later I will need to be informed about before I can decide on this issue.
I think this is the first step that would allow them to.
So I'll move approval of the item.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Good. Ms. Black?
Councilmember Doring?
Yes.
Coberstein? I'm sorry,
Yes.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Coberstein?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. All right, that takes us to 8.6, the quarterly grant report. Ms. Burkowski, did I see you back there? And go ahead, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is one of the regular quarterly reports that I bring to you that discusses the progress on grants and grants management throughout the year. This report covers the current fiscal year to March 31st, in other words, covering the first 3 quarters of the year. As you'll see, it's broken up into several sections. New grants that have been awarded, applications that are pending, grants that are active. There's also a short update on our flood project and the Measure A work that I've been working on. And the highlight there is that later on in May, probably the second meeting in May, we should be having the formal report from the forensic accountant. Once that report is complete, we'll be able to go to Napa County, do our audit, get our contract amendment, and begin to move forward on being able to draw down those funds. And then there's also a short synopsis of the not-for-profit grant applications, both both for the current fiscal year and a brief update of what's going to be coming up on May 2nd for the applications for next fiscal year. There's a lot of information contained in here. I was wondering if perhaps we might be able to hear comments from the council or public comment so that I can respond to a specific issue in the report.
Yeah, let me open the public hearing. Ms. Dell?
Yes, I wasn't looking for a whole report. I read the whole report. I'm kind of fascinated with grants, and I think that it was very well written, clearly written. But I do have two questions. When will with regard to the DWR grant, I would like to know when the conservation easement is going to be finished. And then there's an HCD grant that's lost in the mail. I thought that was fascinating. And I would like to know what that's going to be used for as soon as it's found in the mail or wherever it is. And then I just have to make one final comment. Mary, I'm so glad that you reported that brevity was a Winston Churchill thing, because my favorite expression all my life has been brevity is beautiful. And maybe that was a Winston Churchill as well.
Good.
I'll check.
Okay, Ms. Prokofsky, you respond to those?
All right, to respond to Ms. Dell's two questions. The first one, she inquired about the status of the conservation easement for the Department of Water Resources grant. Foremost, I've been going back and forth with DWR on certain specifics of that. We've come to an agreement, which is very exciting. Now comes the money requirement, the financial requirement. And so one of the requests that's going to be put forth for next fiscal year's budget is the funds to be able to complete that project. And so we'll need money for the word is escaping me. A trust fund for the third-party conservation easement, as well as some funds there for legal fees. Once those are approved, I anticipate about a year in order to complete that work. The second question was on our grant, our community development block grant from HCD. That money has already been spent. It was sadly our reimbursement request that was lost in the mail. We used those funds to pay for a housing feasibility study. So actually, Council, you'll see coming before you over the next couple weeks a quick request from me for a contract extension. And then once that contract extension is complete, then they'll actually be able to reimburse us that money. So that's what that's about.
Okay.
That was a year and a half ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Presented to the council.
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any further council
Mr.
discussion?
I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Black?
Or whatever we need to do, accept it, move
You're-
approval to
you're-
accept it.
Receive and file.
Receive and file, thank you.
Councilmember Doring.
Yes.
Coberstein.
Yes.
Ellsworth.
Yes.
Vice Mayor White.
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith.
Yes. Okay. And then 8.8, consideration of proposed adoption of a resolution designating no parking zones on Elmhurst Avenue and Main Street. And that would be Ms. Smithies.
Thank you. As reported in staff reports, we've been monitoring the parking situation with the opening of the Los Alcabas Hotel. It became an urgent. We've gotten a lot of calls about the line of sight issues at Elmhurst and Main Street. Police chief, fire chief, and myself have not all at once, but have gone out there and deemed that it was an urgency to get at least portions of that red curb painted before we came to council. I mistakenly left on a location map in here as attachment 1. It should have been omitted, and right now I'm trying to figure out our graphic abilities at staff level to try to get an accurate drawing. I wasn't sure if it was necessary, if it's specified 30 feet on either side of the street on Elmhurst and Main Street. Seems very clear to me. Hopefully everyone else that length. It's a very standard. We come to council for approval prior to doing red zones, but we deem this one in a situation where it needed to be done prior to come to council. With that, if there's any questions.
Well, let me open the public hearing here.
Good evening. I'm Anthony McKelly. I live at 1125 Cornella, and I appreciate what the planning director is trying to do, and also with what Mike Quaglia wants is no parking, but all you're doing is pushing that parking onto somebody else. You're not solving the problem we had. The problem was I guess I should say the old council approved this ridiculous resort, and now we're all paying the price for it. You're just going to move the parking further down Main, further up Elmhurst, further down Park Street. These employees have to park somewhere. They have no choice. So you're just doing a Band-Aid. You're not fixing the problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Griffin, Park Street, along with Anthony's quick comments there. There wasn't a problem there at Elmhurst in Maine until that hotel project came around, and then all of a sudden they need their turn lane, so you turn around and you paint Main Street all red on one side. So everybody now starts going up Elmhurst, and like he says, they're down Park Street, Pratt Avenue, the case may be. If you make a resolution or code or whatever it is for the city, second thing, who's going to enforce it? You have codes all over the city and nothing's getting enforced. You have a code for weight and size limit on Pope Street Bridge that's implemented about 2 years ago. It's generated $70,000 in fines, and the city's not got a penny out of that because it wasn't done properly. So when the police officer writes a ticket, it's $1,000 for every ticket. It goes to the county of Napa, and we don't get a penny out of it. So if you're going to make an ordinance or whatever you call these things, you better do it right, because that's why you people are going broke. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any further public comment? Mm-hmm.
I'm Betsy Holzhauer, and I go on Elmhurst frequently as a volunteer for the food pantry, and it is a disaster. You cannot see when you're trying to turn north or south off of Elmhurst to get on Main Street. It's not the only place in town that there's such a problem, but that a building like this could have been approved and allowed to be built without mandating parking for its people. I don't know how that happens. It's sad because we're all paying the consequence for it. And the people who have the garbage left on their property, people using it as a bathroom at night because they see nobody's seeing them. I mean, that's something needs to be done, not just painting curbs and taking the value away from people's property to accommodate a hotel that's totally out of control. I think we're all paying the consequence for this, and the money is important, but not as important as having a good quality of life taken away because somebody didn't read or do the job correctly. I hope that a parking garage is mandated. I don't care how you twist the rules or whatever. It needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any?
Bobby Monette, I'm speaking as a resident. I just want to say I'm so impressed and moved by all the public comments and testimony tonight. And it's kind of hard to get up here, especially if you're not used to it. But I've learned so much, and I'm just hoping that I don't take this stuff as just complaints. I take it as information, and I'm so grateful that people are coming. So I just personally am learning so much about the town. What other way would we hear this? I mean, there's no other forum that I know of. I wish there were. Maybe we can do something about those community meetings we talked about during the campaign to get more sense of what our neighbors are thinking that we don't live right around or whose lives we aren't really in. So I really appreciate everyone's testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agreed.
Any further public comment? All right, let me close the public comment. My understanding of this item really is that the Public Works Department is simply seeking ratification for an emergency safety painting that it did, and it's not going to impact the need for a further deep look at what's going on here.
Correct, but we will continue to monitor.
Yeah. All right.
Well, we have to move beyond monitoring, with all due respect, because you're new. This issue was brought to the council's attention over 2.5 years ago by me. I have direct experience with turning left on this particular intersection for 15 years. And I anticipated this was going to happen, and we were going to work on this through the prior Public Works Director to get some solutions on at least the Main Street portion of it. The employee issue, obviously, that's another completely different issue. I'm sympathetic to that. That's not an issue before us. But in terms of the sight lines on the west side of Main Street, it is still unsafe. It is still unsafe, and it's frankly, I would recommend that folks not turn left there, and that they go to the next street up, which has a signal, because I think it is a matter of time before an accident happens there. It's been going on for years now, and it's reached a level of to the point where I worry, and I don't turn left there very often anymore. Certainly not with my children in my vehicle. So I would recommend that we need that we're past the monitoring stage. I'm a witness, and I manage legal exposure in my practice, so I understand the legal exposure there. The problem there is that you have a curve coming out of the tunnel, and that no matter how many cars, you can go back almost all the way to Las Alcobas, and we'll still have a problem. So we need to investigate reducing the speeds there, enforcement, and really moving that red zone. I would say another 30 cars. Frankly, I mean all the way, with permission of property owners. But the problem is that we made it red on the other side, and I'm not sure if all of those cars are employees. Some of them could be residents who have been displaced with their parking. It's very difficult to back out of a parking space there on the other side. So there's all kinds of issues going on there. But and then the other issue on the employee situation, it's for another day, for another time, but I'd be willing to meet in a subcommittee with staff and the owners of Las Alcobas. This thing is festering, and I want to be solution-oriented. I'm sure they don't want to have this news. I'm sure that they are wringing their hands going, what are we going to do? So we need to come up with some solution, and staff or council members, somebody has to meet with them and try to figure out what we can do. So that's for another time, of course, but I don't think we can afford to wait here on this issue. It's not a good situation.
The subcommittee idea, I must say, occurred to me as well as I was listening to the discussion, and I would ask that the city clerk agendize that for our next meeting, that we consider appointing a subcommittee of two to work with city staff and the ownership of Las Alcobas to see where we can go with respect to this.
I agree. We can't paint the whole town red, and
I'm not sure about the political signal that would provide.
I think we need a solution in conjunction with the hotel, and they have to see that it's in their interest to do it. For their continued visitorship and just ease of using the property. And I support it entirely. I think we should be looking for some off-site parking place for their employees and maybe a van pool or something. But take the pressure off the neighborhood, and I have to believe they would recognize it's in their best interest and would cooperate.
All right, anything further?
I wanted to mention about the corners being painted. Hearing from the Crennella and Park Street residents, the safety issue that was brought up about the corners on Main Street is the same over on Park. Is that people are parking on the corners, so the sight line is obscured. So I think. And I am in full favor of a deep solution that's not a Band-Aid. But in the meantime, I think getting the Park Street area looked at as well, so that until we get the longer-term solution, we at least give them some measure of relief, I think would be a good thing.
Okay, good. All right. At this point, can we move this item at least to get this matter ratified?
Yeah,
Because the red zone's already there.
that was brief. Good.
Brief.
All right. So who moved it?
I think Mary did.
It happened so fast.
Too brief.
Second.
All right. So, Ms. Koberstein and Mr. White. Yeah.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth?
Yes.
Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the consent calendar. New business, 9.1, interim city manager proposal for interviewing city manager candidates. Mr. Pinnell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I've been working closely with Gary Phillips, the executive vice president of Bob Murray and Associates, the firm you've retained to assist with the executive recruitment of a permanent city manager. I'm pleased to advise council that as of Friday of last week, 27 candidates have applied for the position of city manager in St. Helena. Consistent with council desire to involve the public in the selection process, and consistent with the council's desire to include the executive staff in the selection process, I'd like to propose for your consideration the creation of a citizens screening committee for city manager of, I would recommend, 5 local residents to act as one of 2 interview committees, the other being the 8 executive members of the staff. In discussions with Gary Phillips, he expects, and we plan, to request a special meeting be scheduled by the mayor at 4 p.m. on May the 23rd, at which time Mr. Phillips will present to council the top 6 or 7 candidates who have applied by the May 5th final filing date. At that time, he will present the applications, his background investigation conclusions, and his own personal and professional recommendations of why these candidates represent the 6 or 7 top candidates who have submitted. He will also have in his possession the balance of the applications that he's received for this position. It is requested at this May 23rd special meeting that council review the information that Mr. Phillips submits to you, reviews the candidate package, and out of the top 6 or 7 candidates, reduce that to the top 2 or 3 candidates. Once council has been able to reach agreement on the top 2 or 3 candidates, it's recommended that you then turn those top 2 or 3 candidates' application packages over to a citizens screening committee and to the executive staff screening committee for interviews. While we do not have a recommended date or a suggested date yet for the interviews, Gary and I see the citizens panel and the department head panel meeting in the morning, interviewing separately the top 2 or 3 candidates, then reporting their findings and recommendations to Mr. Phillips at the conclusion of the morning interviews. Mr. Phillips will then compile the recommendations and comments of the 2 interview panels and share them with the city council at a special meeting to be called that afternoon. You will then have an opportunity, after hearing the report from Mr. Phillips, of interviewing the top 2 or 3 candidates. I don't presume to know whether the council will make a selection of their top candidate on that afternoon, or if you'd like the top candidate or the top 2 candidates to come back for a second interview. But for the purposes this evening, it's recommended that you authorize and direct the city clerk to advertise for this city manager screening committee composed of local residents to apply and submit their letters of interest or otherwise make the city clerk available or knowledgeable of their interest in serving on this ad hoc committee, if you will. So what I'm suggesting is that you approve the participation of the executive staff and approve the creation of this 5-member citizens panel that will assist the city council in selecting the top candidates for final interview by the city council.
Any preliminary questions of the city manager?
Just for clarification to the public, when you say the executive members, can you maybe help describe who they are for the public?
Absolutely, Councilman.
Or the titles, if not the individual names.
They're the respective directors of the departments, including the fire chief, the police chief, the public works director, the planning director, the finance director, the city clerk, the librarian, and the Kathy Robinson, the HR director.
Okay, very good. Let me open up to public comment. Any public comment with respect to this process? Let me close the public comment. Is there any further council discussion?
I have a couple questions. Does Mr. Phillips have any suggestions to us about how to select a representative community committee or
His one suggestion is that whoever you do select on the Citizens Committee, they bring 2 questions with them. And he'll screen those questions to make sure they're, 1, legal, and 2, not redundant. But he's looking for a cross-section as deemed appropriate by the council, I would assume. Well, I don't assume. I know that would include an ethnic balance, economic, socioeconomic balance, representation of business people, private citizens, elderly. Kind of the same broad group that we find so helpful in serving on other panels that the City Council has created. Nothing unique about this except he wants it as representative of the community as you could make it.
And is it possible, you mentioned he's going to have the paperwork with him of the remaining 20 or whatever that he is.
And there may be more before the closing date of May the 5th.
Can we see that before then? I think I don't know how you would ask a question about somebody who's not in the 6 or 7 if you haven't, if you're curious about somebody else. Is that possible, or is that just not customary?
Anything's possible. It's not customary.
Okay.
It's logistically challenging. It took some arm twisting to reach the earliest possible date to report to council on May the 23rd. He feels comfortable in doing that. I had urged him to do it even earlier than that the mayor would be willing to call a special meeting to accomplish this objective. But he said, I can't do it. So I had to take him at his word. I'd like to get this completed and the council in a position to make an appointment effective on or before July the 1st for obvious reasons.
You can
but May
say
the 23rd is as soon as he can make the report to council. He'll bring the package with him, councilwoman.
Yeah, as
But he
long as he
won't do
can
this-
explain to us why we are where we are with his 6 or 7. If everybody else is fine with that, I'm fine with
I think that's inherent too. Why he selected the 6 or 7, he will be that forthcoming and candid. Why the other people didn't make it, based on the criteria he was applying, based on the criteria that the 5 of you gave him.
Mhm.
You'll find 6 or 7, it's going to be tough.
May I assume this is in closed session?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You said special session, so.
All right. Any further discussion? Are we prepared to give the staff, city manager and city clerk, the direction that is requested?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Black?
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilor Coberstein?
Yes.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. Thank you. Next item, Ms. Mitz, is the presentation of that comprehensive annual financial report, CAFR. Do people want to take a...
5.
We're going to take a 5-minute break, and that always goes to 10 minutes, no matter what I do. 5 official minutes, 10 informal minutes. Excuse me. Let me reconvene our meeting. We're now at agenda item 9.2, which relates to the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, affectionately known as the CAFR. And Ms. Mitz, you're up.
Great, thank you. And in the idea of brevity, I will try. I can talk fast. I promise we can get, if that helps for brevity.
No.
Oh, dang. Well, we are going to, so the CAFR is available online. We're also going to be posting it on the finance website. It should be up this week. We just haven't had a chance to transition it over. So we are going to do a brief review of the CAFR. Some of the main items that we are going to look at, and Mandy Kellogg, our Administrative Services Manager, she is going to be reviewing the MD&A, which is a Management Discussion and Analysis. And that is a brief overview that's at the beginning of the CAFR document. So that is something that I would encourage any resident, city council member, anyone who's interested to read the MD&A. After that, I am going to talk about our deficiencies that were recognized this year within our audit. And then following that, I'm going to introduce Greg. He is actually our auditor. I was going to try to pronounce his last name, and he just said Greg the auditor is fine. So Greg is our auditor. He is partner in the CPA firm that has been doing our audit for, this is the second year now, and we'll be doing it for one more year as well. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the CAFR. What this is, the state law does require local governments to publish a complete set of audited financial statements, and that is what is before you tonight. The firm of Van Lent, I'm just going to say VLF, that's much easier. They did do our audit for us, and they did complete it for the financials ending June 30th, 2016. The City of St. Helena's CAFR does consist of three different sections. The first is the introductory section, the second is a financial section, and then the third is a statistical section. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mandy Kellogg, and she will talk about what is in our MD&A.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'd like to also take a moment briefly to commend Stephanie Killingsworth and Jen Weeks for all of the hard work they did finishing this audit this year. It was a huge, tremendous help to the whole finance department. So these first few slides are an overview of all funds, which include the water and wastewater funds. The city's net position is comprised of the following categories: capital assets at $37.74 million, restricted for specific purposes at $8.82 million, and unrestricted at $7.49 million. Here is a highlight of the changes in the city's net position for all funds. Net position in 14-15 was $52.89 million, 15-16, $54.05 million. This is broken down as follows. A business type activities has a decrease of $0.71 million. Governmental activities an increase of $1.87 million. Revenues increased by 4.17% to $20.43 million, and expenses decreased by 4.32% to $19.26 million. The next slides are referring to governmental activities, which is everything but water and wastewater. That includes non-major funds and the general fund. Overall revenues increased by 3.07% to $13.21 million, with 74% from transient occupancy tax, property tax, sales tax, and other taxes, 11% from fees charged for services, and 15% from local, state, and federal aid. Expenses decreased by 2% to $11.34 million, which is a decrease of $0.24 million from 14-15. The decrease is primarily related to the police chief vacancy for 6 months during fiscal year 2016 and changes in grant financing that reduced general fund appropriations for library services. Governmental activities has a combined fund balance of $13.45 million. This is $1.63 million more than the prior year's ending balance. The increase is largely due to increased collection of sales tax revenue from a final true-up payment for the ending of the triple flip, increased permitting revenue collected, and a moderate increase in economic activity. The general fund balance increased to $4.45 million as of June 30th, 2016, which is an increase of $1.24 million over the prior year's ending restated balance of $3.21 million. Non-major fund balances increased to $8.99 million. The non-major fund balance's increase was largely due to revenue collections for development impact fees that have not yet been expended for capital improvement projects. This slide shows financial highlights for the general fund. The general fund revenues exceeded budget estimates by $1.07 million due to higher tax collections and license and permit fees, which are attributed to a continued economic recovery, one-time fire revenues, and one-time reimbursed state mandated costs. The general fund actual expenditures were less than the budgeted amounts by $0.49 million. The primary reason for the savings is the timing of expenditures and vacancies in positions during the year. This next slide highlights business type activities, which are water and wastewater funds. Revenues increased by 6.23% to $7.21 million. The increase in revenue is attributed to adjusted utility bills that had been previously billed at the incorrect rate. Expenses increased by 15% to $7.92 million. The increases in expenses are attributed to an administrative civil liability paid to the State Water Resources Control Board and a correction to capitalizing interest expense that had been previously capitalized incorrectly. This slide shows a recap of expenses for all funds by percentages. This breaks down in dollars as follows: $7.92 million for water and wastewater, $2.6 million for general government, $3.52 million for public safety, $1.16 million for library, $0.67 million for recreation, $0.82 million for planning and building, $2.38 million for public works, and $0.18 million for all other expenses. This slide highlights capital assets. At the end of 2016, the city had an ongoing investment of $56.28 million in capital assets. This is a net decrease of about $2.21 million, or 3.8% from 2015. The decrease is primarily due to depreciation. And this slide highlights a long-term debt. The city issued no long-term debt obligations in fiscal year 2016. All required debt service payments were paid when due. In government activities, we have $14.02 million long-term debt liabilities, and in business type activities, we have $16.88 million long-term debt liabilities.
Thank you very much, Mandy. And I do also, and luckily Mandy remembered, I do want to thank the finance staff who has spent a lot of hours in getting this information to our auditors, as well as Mandy. Mandy has taken on the CAFR 100% responsibility, so this final document you have in front of you could not actually be possible without her and without the help of the other finance staff. So I wanted to throw kudos out there. The next item I'm going to review is the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting. What this does, it lets us know how we're doing, where we need to basically beef up our measures that we're taking within the finance department to ensure that we are doing things correctly. The good news with the report this year, there were no new items added. They were carryovers from the previous year. We did take some things off the list because we did complete them, so this is an ongoing punch list that we have, and we are very grateful that we didn't have anything new added to the list. This report identifies deficiencies in internal control that the auditor considers either material weaknesses or and significant deficiencies, and it also identifies areas where the city is not in compliance with certain provisions of law. One of the things that I know we've talked about before is our debt covenants. A material weakness is considered a deficiency or combination of deficiencies in internal control such that there is a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the city's financial statements will not be prevented, detected, and corrected on a timely basis. After a material weakness is a significant deficiency, and that is a deficiency or combination of deficiencies in internal control less severe than a material weakness, yet important enough to merit attention to those charged with governance. Our compliance with other matters, our auditors do test the compliance with certain provisions of law, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements, and it makes note of any noncompliance that could have direct and material effect on the determination of your financial statement amounts. This city for 2015-16 audited reports, financials, contain 2 material weaknesses, 2 significant deficiencies, and 1 area of noncompliance. The first area of material weakness is with our policy and procedure. This is a recap of last year. We've just been able to take one off the list. It is accounting policies and procedures, debt management policy, as well as having a fraud prevention and detection policy or a code of conduct. The recommendation by the auditors is to develop and establish formal policies and procedures. These policies and procedures should be approved by the City Council, and they should also consider the Government Finance Officers Association or GFOA recommended practices and other resources during the process of development. The management's response to this, as far as all of the responses, we agree with everything the auditors say, so I'm not going to repeat that theme over and over again. The current management is committed to the development of formalized policies and procedures, and we've already begun that process. It is anticipated that formal policies will be presented to the City Council within the next fiscal year, so 17-18. The second material weakness is accounting records and financial reporting. The auditors did note while there were improvements had been made from the last fiscal year audit, certain analysis and adjustments were still yet to be performed for fiscal year ending 2016 in a timely manner. The situation may be a result of various factors, including lack of formal policies as discussed in the first material weakness. And then the year-end closing process should normally be completed with a few months after year-end. Typically, this report would be presented by December 31st, and as you can see, we're a little bit later, and that's something that we are committing that we want to get done by December 31st next year. So that way we're not working in 3 different fiscal years at the same time as we are now, which I love. The recommendation from the auditor is to take steps to evaluate the current accounting policies and procedures, and Mandy has been working on this over the past year and working with everyone within the finance team to solidify those process and procedures. And also staff prepared the schedule of accounting procedures, and that is something Mandy is currently working on as well. Our response is that the staff has spent some considerable amount of time researching, analyzing, making appropriate adjustments, and as with the first material weakness, that we will continue on the formalization of these policies and procedures. The third item was a significant deficiency, so a little bit less than a material weakness, but still something that's worth pointing out, is the segregation of duties. The auditors did note a lack of adequate segregation of incompatible duties in certain areas. What this means is, for instance, somebody taking in the cash can also be the same person that's cutting checks. So certain things like that where we want to try to make sure that we're separating duties. We do have a small staff, so we are somewhat limited on that, but we have already made some progress in this area after the auditor's report last year, as well as some initial responses from our forensic auditor as well. We immediately put some things into place. The recommendation is to staff evaluate the various functions, determine what practical steps can be taken to segregate these duties, and then also perform risk assessment procedures to determine the significant risks, to see where the city is exposed. Management staff response is that we have already made some corrections, and we are beginning the process to complete the rest of those corrections. The fourth item, which is a significant deficiency, is other internal control issues. The auditors identified, and I'm sorry, I should actually just say 2 on here, my apologies, 2 additional internal control issues. The first is old outstanding checks, and the second are procedures for fuel charges, credit card usage, and travel costs. Their recommendation is to establish policies to investigate old outstanding checks and take appropriate actions as necessary, and also establish control measures related to fuel charges, credit card use, and travel costs. The management's response is we have already started making corrections to some of these processes. As you recall, recently on December 13th, the staff did bring to City Council, and City Council approved a policy and a cheat policy. And before the end of this fiscal year, you will actually be seeing another item that's going to be able to start getting rid of some of these older checks that are been hanging on our balance books for probably 10, 15 years now, some of them.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, a little bit longer, and so we are working on that policy. So by the end of this fiscal year, that actually we've already begun the process of notification and bringing it to City Council.
Do you have a total as to the amount of these old outstanding checks?
You know what? I don't know it offhand. This is something that Jennifer Weeks, our accounting technician, has been working on for us, and that is going to be coming to City Council. shortly.
Okay, very good, thanks.
And then the last item, the fuel charges, credit card use, and travel costs in progress. That is something that we have one of our staff members, Stephanie, currently working on developing some type of process and policy for that item. And then the last item is the compliance issue, and this is our compliance with our debt covenants. I feel like we've beaten this with like a dead horse, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But basically, we have issued debt. We are in non-compliance with the debt that we have issued in regards to our water bonds, and this has been corrected with a recent adoption of rates. And so now I am going to turn it over to Auditor Greg. It's a much easier way. So Greg is going to take some time to explain a little bit about the CAFR, about what the audited financial statements and what his responsibility is as the auditor for the city.
Good evening, council members and city staff. I guess first of all, say thanks to the city staff for all their work in helping us get through another audit this year. Sometimes it can be a little interruption to the daily operations, but having people come in and audit. But we appreciate the effort that the city staff made in helping us finish this audit. I was just going to focus on our. This is what's up there first is the audit report on the financial statements themselves. An audit results in several audit reports, but our focus of all of our audit procedures is on the financial statements of the city. She was mentioning testing for compliance, things like that. Yes, we do come in and we do test for compliance with the bond issues and things like that. We look at your internal controls, but it all relates to the financial statements. And this first page of our audit report mentions, I just wanted to point out that it kind of has some categories of management's. Oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong report here. This is another report that's required by audit standards. The first paragraph started out similar, so I got confused there. But so these are some required communications that our audit standards mandate that we discuss with the city council, as opposed to dealing with management only. And this is, I don't know, it's about a 3 or 4 page document. There's not a whole lot of language in there that I feel like I should point out to you. Maybe the next page there. It discusses, probably starts on the other page, but the main issue here is that there are estimates in the city's financial statements. There are various accounts that require estimates, and some of them are fairly large. For instance, capital assets, depreciation. That's just a big estimate. How many years will these assets last? When are you going to need to replace them? That's a big estimate. There are some other estimates. Your pension liability is a big estimate prepared by actuaries. The factors that they use can have a big effect on the amounts in the financial statements. But that's probably the main thing in that letter. If we ran into issues with management during our audit, this is the letter where we would inform the city council of the difficulties we had. But there are no such things disclosed in this letter. But you can go on to the next report probably, unless there's any questions on that. Okay, here's the report on the financial statements that I started on. The second paragraph mentions that these financial statements are management's responsibility, and that includes the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control, so that the city can prepare accurate financial statements in a timely manner. And and I think you were going over the internal control report a few minutes ago, and we kind of mentioned that there were some weaknesses in that area. as far as being done in a timely manner, which hopefully we can get that up to speed in the near future. Our responsibility as auditors, just wanted to remind everyone that we come in and perform procedures which involve sampling at times, and this is strictly to obtain evidence that is sufficient for us to state an opinion on the city's financial statements. And yes, it does involve looking for fraud, looking for errors, but our main focus is not to come in and find all the fraud, but it is definitely part of our the procedures that we perform. So in the second page of this report is our actual opinion. The top paragraph on the screen there, where it's an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, which means there were no exceptions based on our testing. And then the other sections of our audit report, the following pages, nothing worth really bringing to your attention. Our audit procedures, in accordance with our audit standards, doesn't cover the statistical section. I think that's just probably the most important thing to point out, or the introductory section of the CAFR. Those sections are not subject to our audit procedures. So we audit the guts of the CAFR, and there's also it mentions some required supplementary information in the CAFR that's required by audit standards. Those schedules are, including the management's discussion and analysis, we only perform limited procedures on those documents. All right. The actual financial statements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the details. There's actually two sets of financial statements in the CAFR. This is the entity-wide presentation, which is the city as a whole, divided into two columns. And this particular statement of net position includes all the assets, all the liabilities of the city, including your capital assets, which is the biggest chunk of your assets, and also long-term debt. Those items do not show up in what are called the fund financial statements, except for the business type activities. But anyway, I'll get into those. But towards the bottom, I don't know how this machine works here, but there's a net position. That's all of the city's assets less all of the city's liabilities, divided up into various categories that we don't make up. These are all required in accordance with the various accounting pronouncements, which are many, and they're growing every day. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board is issuing many statements. They've done a lot in the past, and they're still doing it. So, that's why you need to make sure you have some good, solid accounting policies and procedures to keep up with all that. But this net position kind of shows the different categories of restricted net position and unrestricted, and obviously the biggest number is you've got invested in your capital assets, which are long-lived assets and are being depreciated over time. All right, go ahead. The next page. I'm going to actually skip that one. Yay. So the fund financial statements, I'll skip that one too. It's all included in the CAFR, that hard copy, and so there's many standards that we have to follow, or the city has to follow in the reporting in your CAFR. There's the issue of major funds. The general fund is always a major fund, and then you can see the third column over here on this schedule is non-major funds. There's many calculations that go into this, all in accordance with the various accounting pronouncements. But that third column that says non-major funds is made up of many, many funds that are considered non-major based on the calculations required. And so the general fund is obviously the focus. The non-major funds are all made up of special revenue, debt service funds, capital project, which all have restricted money by law, regulation, contracts, grants. In other words, the accounting pronouncements require certain fund types for certain situations, restricted money being one of them. There's very detailed descriptions on what you should report in these various fund types. But you can see the fund balances towards the bottom of the screen there in the non-major funds shows all the restricted and non-spendable money and assigned. These are all categories that are dictated by accounting pronouncements, but it kind of goes from the highest level of restrictions down to the unrestricted or unassigned towards the bottom there. And the general fund is the same, has the same categories, which shows the $3.3 million of unassigned fund balance at the end of the year. This is a snapshot from about 10 months ago. It's you're well into the next fiscal year. The next schedule shows your revenues and expenditures in the general fund and all the non-major funds for the year. And basically the changes in your fund balance at the bottom. The next schedule are your enterprise funds, which are, you're required to show these separately. They cannot, the revenues coming in are restricted for these purposes, the water, wastewater. They're run more like a business where the revenues are supposed to cover the costs of running the operations. And so this is the statement of net position, or the balance sheet, that shows all your assets in the water and wastewater, all the liabilities. There's a couple other categories in there that'll just confuse you if I try to describe them. Deferred outflows. I don't make this stuff up. I have to follow it. It's GASB, or the board that implements all these, keeps coming up with more and more reporting requirements, but I don't see anything else I need to point out on that one. The next schedule just shows the revenues, expenses, operating income or loss for the year, and then your non-operating revenues, expenses for the enterprise funds. And it's kind of self-explanatory. You can see what happened towards the bottom there. The net change in net position is about the fourth line up on the screen, whether it's a decrease or an increase in your enterprise funds. The next schedule is probably going to be way too small to see also, but this is it shows the cash flows for the fiscal year in the water and wastewater funds, and it's divided up into different categories. It just shows here's what cash came in for which reasons, and here's where the cash went out for these reasons, including debt service and things like that. The previous financial statements are on the accrual basis, so there's receivables and payables, but this schedule just shows your actual cash going in and out for the year.
Wow. Okay.
To come up with the ending cash balance in the middle of the screen there. So you can see if there was an increase or decrease in your actual cash in each of the water and wastewater funds for the year. And the schedule on the bottom is just, that'll be more confusing to explain. So, but it is part of the. It provides just more information on the cash flows for the year. All right, this one's just fiduciary funds are required to be reported separately. This is where the city is holding on to assets on behalf of someone else outside of the, for things that don't involve your programs. So that's just kind of a basic statement that shows up every year. And then this is required supplementary information on the general fund budget, which I think Mandy already went over that. The results for the year. We're getting close to the end here. Yeah, so that's, this has the original and the final budget. If there were any amendments, that would be the difference between the first two columns there. The third column is the actual numbers, and then the last column is the variance between actual and final budget. So, as I mentioned, we do issue several audit reports, including the internal control report, which was already discussed. There was another one on the city's appropriations limit, which we're not showing here, but we have to perform procedures to make sure the city is calculating your appropriations limit or the GAN limit. Maybe you're familiar with.
Right.
That makes sense to you. Anyway, we've issued a report on that with no findings on your GAN limit. So, also, any questions on any of that?
Well, let me see if there are any preliminary questions of the accountant from the council.
Were we even close on the GAN limit? Is it of concern to you?
It's hardly ever even an issue for any city throughout California. You just have to go through the motions every year and calculate it. But, most cities, their expenditures are way below the limit that is allowed by state law. So.
Does the estimates, do the estimates that we give to our capital assets affect our standing in the financial community with respect to bonds or ratings or anything like that? In other words, if it's inaccurate, is higher better, lower not as good?
Yeah, I mean, every year you're supposed to, or periodically at least, evaluate what useful lives you are using. Sometimes your initial estimate may change over time, and you need to prospectively maybe revise it. But it affects, it has a big effect on your expenses, for instance, in the water and wastewater funds, and in the entity-wide statements that I was showing. It can have a big, it just contributes to your expenses that need to be eventually funded. It is an estimate, though. Your assets will deteriorate, and you're supposed to be as accurate as possible. And I think you have some policies on what kind of useful lives that you try to use as a city. So. Okay. It's nothing you're not supposed to make it one way or another, just what you actually believe. So,
with respect to the development impact fee funds, are there standards in the financial community with respect to using those funds?
Well, I think they're restricted by law.
Well, other than by law, but in terms of policies are there restrictions other than the law in terms of what they're for? For example, there's got to be a nexus to use certain fees that are in a parking fund for parking. But in terms of how much money we use in a particular account, are there financial standards that govern our use of those funds?
Yeah, as far as compliance with the laws, that you may need to talk to an attorney on the details on that, but we test to see how you're spending all those impact fees, and I think overall they're kind of broad categories, and for the most part, I'd have to go back and look at all your different fees, but we do test for that.
I guess the point I'm making is conceivably you'd have a community that built up a huge fund in some area and never used the money. It just kept 20, 30, 40 years, and you have this huge fund. seems to me, and that's not the case here. I'm just saying, is there that potential, and is there a financial standard, not a legal standard, but a financial a best practices standard? Say, no, we have to use this percentage over so many years.
I have never encountered a standard like that, but most cities spend it pretty quickly usually.
If I may interject, we do have our development impact fee study that you typically do it every 5 years. Every year you are required to file what's an AB 1600 report, and so that is brought to City Council that talks about how much we've actually spent, and if we and we do have a forecast in there when we think we're going to spend funds. Part of the impact fee study and part of the nexus is that there's only a certain percentage of a particular project that can be attributed to new growth. So only that percentage can be paid for the impact fee. So for instance, let's say it's a new park. So we have our park impact fee. If it's designated that only 15% of new development can contribute to it, it means that the remaining percentage has to come from another fund. It can't come from the impact fee.
Right.
So there are some of those legal restrictions that we have, and it is within the nexus of the study.
Okay, thank you.
Any other preliminary questions of? All right, let me open. Why don't you take a seat? You may get some more questions here. But let me open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak at public hearing? I think we're all overwhelmed with numbers, but please come up, yes.
I'm Anthony McKelly, 1125 Cornella. I don't quite grasp everything that's there, but I have a couple things that have been pointed out to me, and this is for the Water Enterprise Fund. I understand that the previous projection till June of this year for the Water Fund was $3,783,308. But that's been revised to $4,640,215, which that means it's an increase of about $800 and some odd $1,000. And that's for the 5 months going from February to June. And that's because the revised amount was because of the rate increase. I also understand, if I'm correct, and I hope this gentleman or somebody in finance corrects this, that in the wastewater fund, you're projected to the end of the year was $2,110,647, but now your revised amount is $2,912,012 or something. But anyway, it's about another increase of $800 and some odd $1,000 you're going to collect in the next 5 months. And if this projection holds true for next year, starting in June to the following year, you're going to about almost $4 million some odd $1,000 over your projected budget. So it looks like you're making lots of money in the Water and Enterprise Fund. And these numbers come from the city. I've got them here, Mr. Mayor. It would seem if you're doing that, maybe you could think about these merchants you're slowly putting out of business in Main Street with all these impact fees you're assessing on very small businesses such as Gilwood's, our ice cream store, and about 10 other businesses that have been hit with this $800 a month surcharge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment?
You know, I tried to read through all those reports today, and boy, is that hard. And so I'm not exactly sure where I got these. I just copied certain pages, but a couple of things I want to mention. On this particular page, agenda item number 9.2, it says that you have an operational spending budget of $10.64 million, but you have revenue of only $10.59 million. Why would you budget for, if you only have $10.59 million, why would you develop a budget that's more than that, $10.64 million? I'll just give you this page, April, if you want. But I thought, wow, that didn't look too good. The other thing, as I look through all the reports, I never see salaries. I'm sure they're buried somewhere in there. And I know that you're going to be working on 2 long, all-day budget sessions in the next month. And what I would really like to see is 5 years worth of look at salaries as a percentage of the total budget. Have salaries as a percentage of the total budget increased over those 5 years? Because it seems like an awful lot more people work here. And I hear people saying that they're overworked and there aren't enough people working here. But for those of us who are out there looking, we'd really like to know what percentage of salaries is affecting the entire budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? All right. Ms. Dell, can you give that page to Ms. Mitz so that perhaps... well, we're going to try. Yeah, my memory is that the budget document, and I kind of think also in the back of the CAFR in the statistical section, there is a historical statistic showing full-time equivalents with respect to the city workforce. That's certainly in the budget document that we get every year, and I tend to think it's in the statistical section as well somewhere, so you can look at the city full-time equivalents year in, year out, and keep in mind as you look at it that one thing that's impacted it is that our firefighters have gone onto the city payroll, which upped the count by 4 or 5, as I recall, about a year ago. The number is around 75, as I recall.
Yeah, it's on page 243 of our staff report.
Okay. Am I close?
You're accurate. You're correct.
Okay. All right. Now, I don't know whether you can respond to the other question Ms. Dell had.
Yes, I can. The page that she's referring to, it's in the MD&A, so it's in the management discussion and analysis. It's on page 13, and it does state that the operational spending of $10.64 million and then the general fund revenue of $10.59 million. That is correct. If you recall, in fiscal year 15-16, so we're talking stuff that was done over a year ago, council did approve several expenditures to take money from the general fund reserves. So that's why you see the difference in what is approved as operational spending versus what the revenues are, because we did dip into reserves on that. So that's the difference.
That's 116 of our staff report, correct? Is that what you're referring to? You said,
yes,
okay.
Correct. I'm so sorry. Yes, page 116 of the staff report. Mr. Hausch has put on there, this is the section in the statistical section of the CAFRA that does talk about the change in positions. So we do have that in there. Salaries and benefits are broken down in our annual budget, and so you can see the changes year over year, and I believe we show 3 years worth inside our annual budget document. The first question from Anthony regarding the change for the estimated revenues and expenses for the water wastewater fund, I believe you're talking about the current fiscal year, not the fiscal year for what this audit is for. So this audit actually, the period for this audit ended last June, so June 16th, 2016. So yes, we did adjust for this fiscal year. We did adjust our estimated revenues versus expenses in our water wastewater funds. It is also important to note just the differentiate between the documentation on the CAFR. In the CAFR, where you do see governmental funds, as Mandy alluded, and also Greg, governmental funds, it wraps up several funds within it, so that's just not general fund. Likewise, when you look at the enterprise funds, or it's called proprietary funds, or business type activities, there's about 3 or 4 different names for it. When you see the final balances, the cash balance on that, it is inclusive of what we consider 561, 571, which are the operational accounts for our water wastewater. It also includes CIP funds as well as impact fee funds. So when you see that total dollar amount, that cash dollar amount, it's just not what we use for our operations. It also includes several other funds in there. So I hope that answers and clarifies at least some of the questions. Yes, it's actually in the back of the CAFR document that's provided, and it's online, but yes. There you go. You can have Noah's copy.
Okay, good.
And I think the point that Mr. McKellar was making is going to be addressed in your next item, 9.3. He's basically saying there's been a buildup in cash reserves for those two enterprise funds as a result of the rate increases, I believe. And I think that will be addressed more specifically in the next item, if I'm not mistaken.
I wasn't going to address it, but I certainly can. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Any further public comment? All right, let me close the public comment. Is there any further council discussion? So, these are obviously very complex documents, and they follow a format. And no one can say that the format meets the standard that Ms. Koberstein enunciated earlier. But there we are. The state says this is the way you do it, and so we do it this way.
Winston Churchill did not have our government.
He did not have governmental accounting. This report is a receive and file report for the City Council, and I do also want to thank Greg for taking the time to come up here and be able to attend the council meeting, and he's also spending a couple days with us preparing for next year's audit.
Okay, very good. Well,
Point I would make, and I'm not getting a warm and fuzzy feeling from the fact that we don't have sufficient policies in place with respect to many items. You said that these items will be addressed in the next fiscal year. Do you have maybe a tighter estimate, maybe in the first half of the next fiscal year? Because that's a long year.
It is really dependent on workload. It's really dependent on what council direction, what city manager direction is for myself in particular, because I'd be the one that is actually implementing, or not implementing, at starting the process of doing the policies and procedures. So luckily I do have some great resources from GFOA that they provide, as well as our CPA that we have on retainer with us. So I would love to say within 6 months, but it really does depend on council direction as well as direction from the city manager on what my workload looks like.
all right.
Well, I'm just one person. 6 months. Sorry.
I have another sort of time question. I'm reading here the transmittal letter to us that says that the state law requires every general purpose local government to publish within 6 months of the close of the year a complete set of audited financial statements. We're way beyond 6 months. Can you just address that?
We are beyond 6 months, and we are out of compliance with it. So yes, that is the law, and that we are required to have it. It's also stems with, we have continuous disclosures. We have different entities that rely on our reporting information. What we've had to do last year and this year, we've had to provide them with unaudited and draft financials. So that's why next year is our goal to have it done by December 31st.
Great.
Thank you to all staff for all the hard work that you've done and for your presentations today. It's much appreciated by me. Thank you.
I think by all of us. So, we received the report unanimously, right? So that would then take us to our next item, 9.3, which is the third quarter update.
We have a few seconds. We're just changing PowerPoint presentations over. And this one is a short report. Larry's laughing at me. Yeah, good job. Thank you, Noah. Thank you very much. Our own Vanna White over there. And in the spirit of brevity, for the next quarterly finance report, I will remove some of the pages at the beginning that are a repeat. So this is our Q3 finance update. So this is all financial transactions for fiscal year 16-17 through the end of March. General fund revenues through March 31st, we have collected a little over $7 million in revenues for the general fund. To date, we have collected 63%, and we are on track with estimated revenues, and we are in line with previous fiscal years for what we've collected at this point.
Yes.
Oh, is it?
63% of.
Oh, yes, 63% of what we estimated that we'd have for revenues, we've collected 63% to date. The general fund revenue categories include property tax, sales tax, transient occupancy, other taxes, license and permits, fines and forfeits, intergovernmental interest and rents, and charges for services and miscellaneous categories. This is a brief overview of our general fund revenue. So you'll see the revenue source on the left-hand side and then the totals. Our adjusted budget revenue, so this included what we've done at mid-year. We are anticipating for general fund about $11.1 million in revenues received. Through Q3 of 2016-17, we have collected the $7 million, and this is in comparison to what we collected last year in 15-16 of $6.4 million. The difference in that we've collected more for this year than last year is that we did have higher revenue projections. Some of it had to do with license and permitting from our planning department, as well as we did have an increase in our TOT sales tax and property taxes. Our initial estimates this year were that we're going to come in higher than last year. Good. Our general fund expenses through March 31st is we have spent $7.5 million. We have 67% spending to date. At this point, typically you're right around 75%, so we are actually underspending what we anticipated, and we are on track with our adopted budget. We are expecting some end of the year items that we hadn't purchased yet will be coming up, but we are on track with our spending. And this year, same with last year, it's commended to the department heads for really keeping tight controls on their budgets. Our general fund expenses, this is a summary by department. So I want to point out on the left-hand side are the different department descriptions, and on the right-hand side you can see the percentage of budget available. You want to be right around the 25% at this mark, meaning you have 25% of the year left, you have 25%. And as you can see, if you look overall, non-departmental, we're at 38% available, city council 46, city manager 26, 38. So if you look down the line, you can see where everybody is doing really, really well with their spending, and they do have a big percentage of their budget available. Some of the items, like I said, there are some contracts that are coming into fruition during the fourth quarter, so you'll see those more in line by the end of the year, being close to almost a 0% of their budget available. For our water fund through March 31st, our revenues are expected is $3.1 million. We have collected 67% to date, and we are on track with our revenue estimates. And this revenue estimate does include the increase in the water rates that were enacted in November of 2016. Our expenditures right now, we're at $3.4 million. We have expended 65% to date, and we are on track with our adopted budget. And I should say, adjusted budget, because this includes our mid-year budget review. As noted earlier for both the water and wastewater funds, that we do have the additional revenues. It is important to point out, particularly with the water fund, is that when the adopted budget for fiscal year 16-17, we were showing that just for our operations in the water fund, this does not include capital improvements, that we are going to have a $1.4 million deficit in this account. So it means our expenses were $1.4 million more than the revenues that we were bringing in. So even with the rate adjustments that were done, that will only cover a portion of what our deficit is, and we're expecting our deficit to still be about $1.2 million, where our expenses are higher than our revenues. So we are dipping into basically our net position, or they're not considered reserves for the enterprise funds, but it's basically our cash that we have. We are dipping into the cash. For our wastewater fund, the revenues that we've collected to date is $1.7 million. We're 66% collected to date, so we are on track. Our expenditures is $1.6 million that we've spent. We have expended 71% to date, and we are on track with the adopted budget. So as you can see, these are also the adjusted numbers that in line with the mid-year budget, and the same scenario with the wastewater fund as well. Wastewater fund, we are right about the zero, so our revenues equal our expenses, so we will have a little bit more left over in our wastewater fund, so we do have a cash positive flow on here. However, most of the money has been recommended by our consultant, as well as talking with our Public Works Director. Those are things that we do need for the rehabilitation of our systems. The last thing that City Council has requested, and I apologize, in the staff report, I just realized it today. The notes on it, I did not have them in the staff report. I had them in here and in my staff report, and I forgot to update it with the city clerk. So you can see these are the checks over $100,000 that were sent out during the third quarter. So this is from January 1st until March 31st. The first is the City of Napa. That is our purchase to purchase the water of $114,000. Wilmington Trust. This was our 2012B bond payment for our water wastewater of $119,000. The third one is Burke Williams Sorensen, which is our February legal invoices. Typically, it's not over the $100,000 mark. However, there was one October legal invoice that inadvertently we forgot to pay, and so we got that cleared up with the law firm. And then the fourth item is Union Bank, and this is our 2000A bond payment for our water system, and that was $145,000. This is my quarter 3 finance report. There are no council actions required. It's a receive and file, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any initial questions from council?
I just wanted to respond to Mr. McKelly's statement from earlier, but I can wait until after.
Sure. Why don't we open the public hearing and see whether anybody wishes to comment at public hearing?
I'm going to beat on this horse till I understand it. Okay, I can see a list of FTEs, and I understand FTEs, but I don't know what percentage, money-wise, that is of the total budget, and that's what I'd like to know. And I see that the city attorney is not included in there, so somewhere that has to be included. And also, what about consultants? I mean, they take the place of staff when we don't have enough staff. So I'd really like to understand all of that.
Okay, thank you. Any further public comment? All right. Again, with respect to Ms. Dell's comments, my understanding is that all that will be in the budget documents that we get in preparation for our May 2 meeting.
That is correct. And in the highlights for the Q3 financial report, there is a line item for attorney. Attorney is not a city employee, so they wouldn't be included in the salary and benefits portion. However, in the actual staff report, there's a line item that says attorney, and that will show all legal fees that we're anticipating to pay for this fiscal year.
Okay. Any further council discussion with respect to this item? Mr. Ellsworth, you had a question.
Well, yeah, I was going to respond to Mr. McKelly's statement earlier about trying to get some help for the small businesses that are impacted, particularly with the wastewater base rate. And I believe that if we have the means to do it in the way that we're helping to subsidize some of the low-income residential, the problem is that, some of these rates went up from $50 to over $800, and I don't think anybody here is arguing that people, are willing to pay more. But this substantial increase, what it is that to make that $800, a business has to make many, many, many thousands of dollars in revenue over that to generate that profit. And if you take 10 or 15 businesses in a 2 or 3 block radius that are all of a sudden encumbered with this, I think we're going to have a really serious problem. And I think that the ad hoc committee will address this and will get to it and find a balance. But in that period, these businesses are going to start projecting out, and they're going to look, and it's going to be a cliff. And so I have started compiling sort of reports from merchants, and then also reaching out to other cities who have a way of managing small, medium, large restaurants based on seating, based on flow, based on square footage. So I think we need to look at a way to make sure that our small businesses are not over encumbered, and I think we need to do it ASAP. So I will have this report together at the end of the week, and I'll submit it to the ad hoc committee. But I think we should be prepared to make an urgent, some sort of resolution to help while the long-term solution is laid out.
Okay. Well, we look forward to the report for sure, and I understand your point, and I'm actually hoping that there's some way to make some accommodation that's consistent with that miserable Capistrano case. But we'll see.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and I would suggest maybe you submit that report to the council. Maybe it be an agenda item at our next meeting. If I hear you right, I think what you're talking about is some kind of temporary relief while the ad hoc committee does its investigation, and the rates may change or the rates may not. But if that happens, it's not going to happen for 5-6 more months. And,
Well,
my concern is that a small business that operates with a very thin margin, 5 or 6 months may be too long, and they may get into serious trouble soon. And I just want to be prepared to have a means for them to keep going.
my guess is that any temporary relief would have to be subsidized out of the general fund, but that's a legal question that would have to be addressed.
That is correct. Any subsidy would have to be general fund, and I would request that Tom's office, somebody from his firm that is an expert in Proposition 218 in utility rates, would actually review it to make sure that we don't have any legal constraints to what you possibly could be proposing.
Right.
yeah, I think of it as actually quite similar to the residential program. Once you decide what it is you want to do.
Right.
I mean, perhaps we classify these people as commercial until we figure out exactly what the strength and, of the flow is. Something that's more reasonable and they could keep paying, but it would be a lower rate. And true it up in the end when we know where we actually are.
It's a complicated subject for sure.
If I
just wanted to follow up on the point that you made. I do not want to be a recipient of your document directly. If you're going to send it to the council, I would hope that you send it to the city clerk first.
Oh, yeah.
And also, I would like
for Brown Act purposes, not because I don't want to receive
I would
it
like
before.
to see it go to staff first and have them kind of vet it, just like on the noise issue that we're going to see next. I think it would be helpful for discussion if we had all the facts prior to a meeting. So
perhaps I could agendize it for the next meeting, and then in the meantime get this report to the staff, hopefully by the end of this week, and if that sounds...
With all due respect, that would not be enough time for staff to vet it. Our city clerk would have to have all of the draft staff reports by this Friday, and that would not leave, with budget coming up, that would not leave me any time to be able to vet it. I can definitely have some of my other staff potentially look at it, but I think for the next council meeting to have a thoroughly vetted report, it would be an impossibility at this time.
All right. At this point, can we file and receive the 2016-17 third quarter finance update?
do we need a motion on that?
I don't think we did. Do we need a motion with respect to that? Pardon? Consensus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks again, Ms. Metz, for your report. That takes us to...
before we go off of this issue, the question is that's floating out there is whether we can have a simple report that shows the trends on our total personnel costs over the last, say, 8 to 10 years. The information is in there, but it is hard to grasp that information in any one spot. You would have to go to several spots. It would be interesting to see just over the last 10 years what the trend is in terms of just total personnel costs, and then you can take that information and you can compare it to our FTEs and make some assumptions about where we are in terms of our personnel costs as a proportion of our total budget. That would be helpful for me.
And when you're talking about this, are you focused on the general fund as opposed to the wastewater and water enterprises? Otherwise, to me, to be meaningful, it has to be broken down between the general fund, water, and wastewater.
That's fine. That would be even more helpful for me.
I can definitely work on gathering that type of report. Maybe it's something I can make the goal of presenting it at the final budget hearing that we'll have once for adoption of the budget. That's something that I can easily add in there by that time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. That takes us to 9.4. This is coming. The memo is coming from Mr. Brown, so maybe I'll turn to Mr. Brown first here. I think this was Ms. Koberstein's item, but
It was, and I would defer to Councilmember Koberstein with respect to any questions. The effort we undertook in writing this was one that was a cooperative one between my office and the planning director's office, which is really consistent with the way that that a city attorney will operate in trying to interpret what various parts of a municipal code mean and say. Typically, the city attorney won't just announce what's in the law, but typically we'll try and work with the city staff, which is charged in the first instance with applying and interpreting these laws. Specifically here, the zoning ordinance is quite explicit in saying that in the first instance, it's your planning director who makes determinations as to how to apply your laws and what they mean. And the reason that provisions like that are in zoning codes generally is that codes are it's an impossibility for most zoning codes to be fully clear and explicit with respect to every regulation you apply, and there are both omissions and inconsistencies and ambiguities that exist in these codes that require that you have a planning director who says, here's what it means, here's how we apply it, here's how we've applied these provisions over time. So that's kind of a long-winded introduction of saying what I tried to do when I wrote my memorandum here was to work with NOAA to go through the commercial districts, mainly the commercial districts in your zoning ordinance, to address three areas: noise generators, music, and entertainment, and to see the various ways that your code addresses those issues district by district. The memorandum tries to do that. As you'll see, there are provisions there, some of which are fairly easy to follow, and some of which you would really need to know on a case-by-case basis how they're going to be interpreted. And that I think is what your planning staff have tried to do and try to do on an ongoing basis. The second thing I tried to do then was to, after going through your zoning ordinance provisions, commercial district by commercial district, was to then go through your noise ordinance, which is in a separate part of your municipal code. It doesn't address zoning, but it's unclear how it is supposed to interact or apply with your zoning ordinance. And frankly, my memorandum doesn't resolve those inconsistencies, nor does the memorandum try to do that, or to try to resolve the inconsistencies in your zoning ordinance that your planning staff, again, is charged with applying and interpreting. So that's kind of the overview. I'm happy to go through the memorandum, but it really speaks for itself with respect to what each district set of regulations says with respect to noise generators, musical events, and the ability to provide for those music and entertainment in each of your commercial districts. Maybe that's a good place to start the conversation up, and I can try and answer questions. Mr. Hausch can also answer questions probably more competently and fully than I can with respect to the zoning ordinance provisions. Again, he and I worked pretty closely together along with Mr. Heacock, trying to really understand how the various provisions in the zoning ordinance would play together and what buried treasures there might be. An example of that, for example, would be in your winery district regulations. in there, you have a provision that, as I say in my memo, that provides that wineries are subject to certain regulations and are allowed to have certain events, which are defined in your ordinance, in your winery district regulations, as including major public assembly events, including concerts. There is a provision in that in the introduction to the winery district regulations that says any winery that carries a general plan designation of agricultural is to be classified W, meaning winery. Now, it doesn't. That sentence in the zoning ordinance follows immediately after a sentence that says it applies to agriculture. I'm sorry. The section that says that every winery, essentially winery, or the language in the winery district defines wine-producing entities, will be classified as W. That immediately follows a sentence that says that this applies to agriculturally designated parcels. It's your guess, your guess is as good as mine as to whether the second sentence in that section is intended to modify the first sentence, or whether the language in there that says all wineries effectively carry the W classification applies citywide. You'll see, in my opinion, I construed it more narrowly than that, because I believe that that would be a more sensible, reasonable construction, but certainly it's not the only construction that could exist from that provision in your W district regulations. That's just an example of the kind of ambiguity that your planning department has to deal with on a daily basis, trying to figure out how to apply these provisions that seem to be competing or inconsistent, and to resolve these ambiguities. And these issues make it to your planning commission and ultimately make it to you on a case-by-case basis. But that's just an example of one of the ambiguities. Another one is that your zoning ordinance refers in many places to wineries, and then in other places refers to a provision allowing for related uses or ancillary uses. The question is, what does that mean with respect to a winery? Does that mean, for example, your winery district has a very clear explication of what winery-related uses are, and they include, again, major public assembly events, including concerts. Question there is the reference to winery-related uses intended to apply to all your wineries in every district citywide? That's an issue, again, that will have to wind its way through to you, through your planning commission, and to you on a case-by-case basis. I think it's fair to say that in my conversation with Noah on this issue, we didn't come to any clear understanding of that. I think that, for example, he would I think quite reasonably conclude, no, you have to look at each district and the prohibitions for each district. For example, you have other districts that impose certain noise-related or music limitations that aren't in your W district. So in any event, I think that I'm at risk of doing what my memo probably did as well, which is utterly confusing the public and all of you. But I think part of what I wanted to bring to you and emphasize to you is that this is a complex and sometimes inconsistent set of regulations that really require case-by-case application day to day for the folks in the planning trenches. Anyway, I'm happy to answer questions and work with you on that.
Well, are there any preliminary questions before I open up the public hearing? I think let's hear from the public first, and then we'll go and have a discussion.
My name is Grace Kistner, and I guess I'm representing both myself and the Planning Commission, but if you really want to get even more confused, Tom, then read the public health portion of the 1993 general plan and see how many decibels are allowed to be set around town. And so I don't know how you handle that, but I think that's something that we've either got to change the general plan in that, or we've got to change the whole noise ordinance in each one of the districts of the code. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Griffin, Park Street, St. Helena. What I kind of gather, you're trying to, curb the noise and all the parties and stuff at the wineries, and especially in our area and stuff. And I like, when you put this together, I'd like you to interject a whistle-free zone for the wine train, if we want to make something funny here. Because now that the wine train has added another, I don't know if it's just wine tasting only or anything, but now it goes all the way to Krug Winery. The other wine train kind of basically bases itself in the commercial area of town. So this other train continues up the tracks from Railroad Avenue up, and it basically goes behind probably estimated roughly 30 residents, and some are back right up to the train tracks. And that guy goes all the way to Krug, and he sits there and just blows the horn continuously. And, I didn't think nothing of it at first, but then outside working in the yard stuff, it just gets annoying. It just beeping, beeping, beeping all the way up and all the way back. And I called on the wine train on that. And they said, all you have to do is get a hold of the public, come up with an ordinance, send it to the Public Utilities Commission, which regulate the wine train. And basically, this came right from a gentleman at the wine train, because he says they have all the up-to-date crossing guards on Pratt Avenue, Pope Street, whatever the case may be, that it would basically, if you adopt a whistle-free zone, they stop blowing that horn on all the wine trains. The city of Petaluma right now is introducing this. For that new train from Santa Rosa all the way, I think it goes to Marin County or on Falls in the Bay or whatever.
Yeah, smart train.
They're thoroughly disgusted with this, and they're adopting it, and it's going flying right through every channel of the city, to where they're not going to be able to blow a horn going through the city of Petaluma. So thank you. I'd just like you to consider this in your adoption, Mary, that you're trying to do here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Thank you.
I'm Bobby Monette, speaking as a person again. Okay, I guess what's important to me are the cumulative effects that have been happening in this town over the last 40 years since I've been here, and I think that the idea of first of all of the permits, when you can get permits to essentially violate the noise ordinance. I mean, that's what the permits are. Because the noise ordinance is clear. You're not supposed to have amplified music past your building and so forth. But when you have a permit, then you get to violate those ordinances. And that's what I was concerned about. First of all, the way they are granted. I believe they're granted by the police chief. There is no public input. Nobody can say anything about it except the person who's applying for the permit. My sense now is there's so many venues now, the impacts of these events on the neighborhoods has gone way up. And sound doesn't pay attention to zoning boundaries. It's like they used to have no smoking sections in airplanes and no smoking sections in restaurants. And I remember when it was first suggested to get rid of those, and people were, they couldn't believe anyone was even asking for that. Well, that's what's happening now, because I guess it's not a matter of doing a case-by-case basis. If you do a case-by-case basis, the public never gets to talk about it, as far as I know. The structure, the system is not set up so that there's public, there's an opportunity for public to weigh in on each permit. That's, I know that's not the case. So I think that an ordinance needs to be tightened up. I think it needs to be clear that in this town now, it's never okay to party in my bedroom, in my living room, in my kitchen. It's not okay for anyone else's party to be there without my permission. And that's what's happening, party after party. And just because you get a permit on a weekend that you can blast into someone's house until midnight because you have a permit. That's how it is right now. And that's what I would like to see changed. And I would like it to be clear that it's not okay to be, whoever you are, to be in someone else's home uninvited. And, the noise pollution is not just a matter of annoyance, it's a public health issue, psychologically and physically. And I have data on that if you'd like to see it. I'm not just making that up. There have been a lot of studies about the public health issues of noise pollution in someone's private home. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? All right, let me close the public comment and invite council discussion. You want to begin, Ms. Koberstein?
First, I want to thank you for the memo. I think it does point out the big inconsistencies in our ordinances, which is one of the reasons I brought this to the council. I'm not anti-music. I got lots of emails after my previous comments that you want to shut down the one enjoyable thing about summer, and that's not where I'm coming from at all. Even when I read your report, I find I have more questions, because when I read the zoning ordinance, it says that the lands that are devoted to growing and producing the wine get classed in the winery district. Well, does that include the hospitality center that's on the other street? I mean, as far as I know, I think the Davies thing is still classified service commercial. So, it's even questionable, where do you draw the boundaries of the winery district? I read that as intended to cover the actual agricultural growing part. But it's up for grabs. You talk about uses that had the right in 1979 to do something. We don't seem to know what that was, but we do know that whatever they were allowed to do, they didn't have any right to expand it or enlarge it. And the comments that people are making are that it was never like this before, or this is happening to a greater extent. It's true you can have some concerts in the winery district, but that's with the conditional use permit. It's not allowed as a right. So I want to read a couple things from this general plan that I hope we're going to adopt pretty soon. Going to Bobby's comment, it says, noise is a sound which is unhealthful or unwanted. It can be a human-caused public health hazard. Then we say that the ambient noise environment in the city of St. Helena is notable for being extremely quiet, especially in the evenings and at nighttime. The noise environment can be characterized as being that of a quiet rural setting. We talk about the wine train, which has an average of 2 trips a day. We talk about noise impacts related to agricultural uses, and those are noise from wind machines, tractors, and sulfur blowers, not concerts. We have a new table in here that talks about what constitutes intrusive ambient noise if you're in a residential area. And it's gone down 45 decibels from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. at night. So I think we need to get our hands around this and come up with a reasonable solution of how we're going to regulate this kind of activity. And what I would propose is we try to get to work on it with the Planning Commission if they're so willing, and change the permit process and the regulations. I would propose that we come up with a temporary use permit procedure, maybe on an annual basis for somebody who wants a concert series that would be subject to, notice and a hearing, and people could come in and talk about it. You issue a permit to somebody to have 5, 6, 8 concerts in a year, and then you get your feedback on it when they come back the next year. And they either did what they said they were going to do or they didn't, and they get a new permit. We might have a separate kind of permit just for all of these sort of nonprofit activities, these things that just happen on a day, on an afternoon in a park maybe. Maybe we have a separate set of regulations for those, so we're not clogging the Planning Commission calendar with hearings on them. But I think we need something that's workable and recognizes what our plan provides. I mean, if somebody has a conditional use permit out there to have, concerts for 3 months running, fine, I'll be the first one to honor it. But I think we need to really understand what the facts are here, because we're just sort of operating on, well, if they turn their speakers, it's going to be okay. But noise doesn't respect those kind of boundaries. It goes up and it goes all around. So when we can get to this, I would like us to get to it. I think it's an important issue. It's definitely a summertime issue. And I recognize that Behringer has offered to cut back their schedule this summer. Saturdays only, not Saturday and Sunday, which I think is an improvement, but I do think we need to address this.
I guess my view of it is that we need to get the general plan adopted first and then turn to it. It's an important subject. There's no doubt about it. You read this memo. It is a brilliant memo, but it would confuse any rational person reading through what our law is. And, if Noah can work through this, he gets the next appointment to the Supreme Court. So it's clearly an issue that we need to face up to. But I feel that it's best to get the general plan adopted first, then we have the policies, and then we work from the policies toward a new ordinance at that point. I might also say, with respect to the vine train, and I may have this wrong, I do believe you can have a whistle-free zone. I think the issue, though, is whether if the city adopts a whistle-free zone that is approved by the California Public Utilities Commission, that in conjunction therewith, you also accept the liability that may come from the fact that you have a whistle-free zone. In other words, the liability shifts from the vine train to the city. And I think that's potentially a significant issue, and I'm certainly very interested in looking how the SMART train and its the municipalities it goes through where it has a quiet zone handles that issue. But I think that's a real problem.
I know somewhere we've gotten some publication that actually talks about, and I think it's a publication from the Public Utilities Commission that has kind of the procedure to adopt a whistle-free zone. So, gosh, if I can find it.
I think it might be a matter of your.
I think you're refreshing my recollection as well. That I have seen it, and I do believe the liability issue is a serious problem.
Yeah. So my feeling is also that we should finish the general plan and then address this in the update of the zoning ordinances. And I think it behooves us to have a number of public hearings. Having lived through being on council and making amendments to the noise ordinance on the leaf blower issue, it can take a long time to kind of vet this whole issue. So that's my feeling.
Dorian?
I don't have anything else to add to the discussion other than, yes, I think we need to complete the general plan so we have at least a framework from which to work. It is an important issue. There's no question it's festering in the community. We have a lot of issues that are starting to, not fester, they've been festering for so long, frankly. And it's because of the delay in the general plan, we really have not been able to address so many of these zoning ordinance issues. And it's just every day. And people come to me and they ask me, well, can this person do that? Can that business do that? And it's so fact-driven. And I try to read the ordinance. And I go, well, they're in this zoning district, and then the permit may say something entirely different. And so I throw my hands up and realize we have to clean these up because it goes to the central quality of life issue, and there's going to be a balance. Revenue generation, direct to consumer is
versus people just being able to sit in their backyard and having a glass of wine without having something just totally in their face. I understand that. So we have to be able to address those issues. They're not going to go away. We have to do that. To me, I mean, there are probably many that are on the urgent list in terms of cleaning up some of our zoning ordinances, but this is one. It just is, frankly, every week I'm getting somebody coming to me and talking about noise. You could be supportive of a business and also be supportive of the quality of life of our residents. Somewhere there's a healthy balance that we need to achieve for our community.
All right. Yes, Mr. Ellsworth.
My thoughts are that this is a small rural town, and we have codes and that were written a long time ago, and we're sort of based on a community balance, and things have changed, and we definitely see a change in wine marketing, and it's not just in Napa County. I've been to Paso Robles area. I'm actually, next month, I'm going to Virginia, to the wine country there, to meet with residents who are dealing with a lot of the same kind of impacts of marketing in rural areas. And so it's this sort of newer phenomenon that, we all support the wine industry, but there's a point where the hospitality part of it can encroach on the residential zoning, and that balance, we've got to find that balance. And there's all different kinds of noise and parties, and I think that we accept somebody's 40th birthday party or somebody's teenagers are graduating. I think we all live with a certain amount of noise, and even support it when it comes from a business that we feel is caring of the community. So I think there's a balance to be struck, but we need to make sure that we have the ability to enforce a quality of life for the people who've invested in their residential zoning, and their right to, as we say, not be intruded upon in a way that's just too much. So I think it's something that we need to approach soon. I understand the general plan thoughts that we need to get that tied up first, but how do we make sure that over this summer we have something to make sure that our residents who live here are feeling protected?
Anything further, Ms. Goberstein? Well, I think the sense of it is that we get the general plan adopted and then turn to a serious revision of the ordinance. In the meantime, I think we're in a position where we have to work with what's here. All right. Let's go on to 9.5. And this is your item, Mr. Ellsworth. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, let me try if I can find my... a number of people have brought up the idea that we're seeing more and more large commercial trucks, semi-trucks, using the back streets and the residential areas as cut-throughs. So the idea of this is to create some sort of an ordinance that says that these large trucks need to use a direct route from the highway to where they're going and not cutting through the residents, because it's not just a safety issue, but the trucks break down the residential streets so that we as residents end up having to pay for the extra damage. So that's where this came from. A number of people brought it up to me, so this is the idea of getting this conversation started.
All right. Any further initial council comment? Let me open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to this?
Oh, sorry. I wasn't planning on this, but just today I was walking on Allen Street between, Pine and Spring, and this big semi UPS truck was just, kind of missing all the Main Street, all the Highway 29 traffic going to Spring Street, most likely to get onto. I didn't see it, but I am in, could be making this up, but it seemed to me that he was going to go to Spring and turn. Why else? I mean, it was huge. So, and I hadn't seen that before, and I thought you had mentioned this issue, and I thought, oh, that's what he's talking about. And I guess some other people have seen stuff too, but I saw that today, and it was kind of startling to have this huge truck on Allen Street. It was really out of proportion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Anthony McKellar at 1125.
Going to set a record today, Anthony.
Huh? Yeah. I'll be gone, though, for a couple of weeks, so you won't see me for a while. My 3 minutes started. Anyway, yeah, I'm one of the people that brought this to Jeff because I live on the cut-through from Main Street to Pratt Avenue. And it's only reduced now because the Pratt Avenue Bridge is not working. Otherwise, constantly, trucks from Behringer's can't make that corner at Pratt, which they just got approved for an expansion. And so they cut through our street. And sometimes in the morning, a truck that's going to Behringer's is parked outside my door, just sleeping for the night because they're not open. All kinds of people cut through there. And with this ordinance, if an ordinance happens, city might consider banning truck traffic like they do on the Pope Street Bridge, similar to the Pratt Avenue Bridge. Because twice last summer, a friend of mine and I had to assist a truck and trailer gas truck that was coming up the trail, tried to turn left on the Pratt Avenue Bridge, and got stuck. My friend and I got out, stopped traffic both ways so he could back up off the bridge. And so there's going to be more problems like this once that bridge, if it ever gets open. But the issue with Behringer's is just going to continue for us. And they go through there all the time. It's not just once in a while. And hopefully the city will address this because our street is a mess now. It is totally destroyed. And it's just the problem with that intersection at Pratt and Main. They cannot... Pratt Avenue and Main, now that you put that left turn lane in there, the trucks cannot move over on the highway, a truck and trailer, because I guarantee you there's no way a truck and trailer can turn right onto Pratt off Main and make that without now running over a passenger in the other lane that's trying to get on Main. It is impossible to do. But the city's just going to have to deal with that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Smithers can testify to this, too.
Yeah. Mark Smithers, Vallejo Street. Yeah, this is a great idea. I think it's a long time in coming. I think that had we, put in an ordinance similar to this, and I think it's very simple. I mean, just stay on Highway 29 and take the shortest route on our streets that you can. I'm sort of maybe front and center on this. I see this all the time with people... Big trucks, they take Sulphur Springs, they take South Crane, they take Valley View, then they take Allen, they go to Madrona, and these are big trucks. I mean, we've seen Safeway trucks on South Crane. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, just the other day, and it's interesting to hear this as an anecdote. A tour bus company from Napa, which will remain nameless. We were in the backyard. Somebody, I think it was Paul, was talking about enjoying your glass of wine in the backyard, and it was a diesel-powered bus. And I know police is working on speeding, but they came literally flying down South Crane, going south at 40 miles an hour, diesel smoke blowing, and we were in the backyard with friends. And it's like, great, isn't this just really enjoyable and quality of life sort of situation? And I called up I called up the nameless tour group down in Napa, and I actually got a hold of somebody, and the operations guy, and he talked to me, and I walked him through the whole thing, and he said, no, they shouldn't be speeding, and this and that and the other thing. I said, it'd be really nice if you could just stay on 29 and take the shortest route. He goes, well, you have nothing that precludes us from doing that. So, I mean, he knows the rules. He knows we don't have an ordinance. He knows he can cut around because Highway 29 is backed up, and that's what they do. And this was a Greyhound bus-size bus. So it's definitely semi-trucks, and it's Greyhound. So you maybe have to put the bus thing in there, too. And hopefully nobody, in the industry, this isn't about vineyards. This isn't about those guys. They got pickup trucks with trailers that are moving, a tractor somewhere. That's not what we're talking about here. And I don't know to what extent you guys drive on, Sulphur Springs and then South Crane, but had you put this into effect 10 or 15 years ago, I mean, that road is literally falling apart at this point in time because of the heavy truck traffic. So, and there is one, so it's safety, it's destruction of the streets, it's livability, without having all the diesel smoke. I think it's a very easy, simple solution. Stay on Highway 29, take the shortest route. It's a piece of cake. This is so easy to come up with this ordinance. And there is one person, though, one group that I would like to commend, because Harold Smith used to, use side streets and alternative routes, and they're 99% compliant now. That they just go straight out to the highway, and so the local businesses are actually sort of complying, doing what we want to do. It's folks outside of our city that are doing this. So anyway, thank you. It'd be great. It'd be fantastic.
Thank you. Any further comment? Yes.
Mike Griffin, Park Street again. Behringer's, they came and they got this thing through the Planning Commission to do with their project or whatever. And the bottom line is, it's a full-blown new crush facility in the whole 9 yards. And they got the little pieces they put together, the Planning Commission here a week or so ago. Now they got more stuff I see proposed to come on, so it's just adding. I've gone over there. They've got grapes they pulled out. So the bottom line, they're bringing in grapes from out of this town area, which you're talking about the wineries that the grape grow here and all that stuff. They're bringing it from Sonoma County and all over, and they're just going to increase more truck traffic. And they come through Park and cut over to Cornella. They're out there in the middle of the night waiting to get in, and the guy mentioned, we'll adjust our crush time and everything. Well, when the winemaker says it's time to crush, they crush. And it's regardless of what ordinances you have or anything. And the bottom line is, you got to enforce them. And there's nobody to enforce them. You don't have an enforcement person in the city. So I think you need to really look at getting someone to enforce this stuff to where staff and things like that don't have to spend all their time. The police department, they don't have time to do it. And if you have something where you have just an enforcer on all these issues that are around town that are popping up, people's bushes growing out on the sidewalk, whatever the case may be, but this traffic issue with these trucks on Park Street, Elmhurst, all this, you have to enforce it if you come up with these ordinances. So I think you need to get an enforcer first to start doing whatever you put in place, because you could put all that stuff in place you want and nobody's going to enforce it. We can call till we're blue in the face. The cops can't do much. The truck's gone. You got to be out there, sit around and look and see what truck cuts through Crane Avenue or whatever place may be, and then write a ticket for them and have a code that you can get money back, revenue out of that ticket that's written. Not like what's on Pope Street now, and you have $70,000 in tickets that have been written by the police department here, and they don't get any funds. You guys don't get any funds from it. So like the police department, why would they write a ticket now on Pope Street for a truck going across it? They're not going to waste their time, and I don't blame them. Thank you.
All right. Any further public comment?
Thank you.
All right. Let me close the public comment. I'm sure the police chief was listening to that with great interest back there. Again, I'm no expert on this, but my understanding of tickets and the way the revenues are distributed is that the state basically collects almost all of it, the greedy state, as opposed to the municipality. But again, we all can use further enlightenment with respect to that. Personally, I'm quite in favor of such an ordinance. I must say, I live on Allen Avenue, and maybe I'm a little blind, but I don't feel that heavy truck traffic, by and large, is much of a problem on Allen Avenue. Yes, we do see the occasional large UPS truck, but we have a lot of construction and deliveries going on in Allen Avenue on Tainter Street, and they're bringing in dishwashers and this, that, and the other thing, and I'm sure they're making deliveries not just here in St. Helena, but in Calistoga and elsewhere. So I think, it's there may be. But on the other hand, Safeway trucks, obviously on South Crane or North Crane, that's a big problem. They shouldn't be there, without a doubt. I have no idea what's involved in writing an ordinance here. My general reaction is to wait until the general plan is approved without putting an additional burden on staff. But if it's that simple, is that something that perhaps the city attorney's office could take a look at and come back and tell us? Am I not being heard? Sorry. Can the city attorney's office at least take a quick look and see how other cities have done this? And
Yes,
see,
we can
see
look
whether
at that.
see whether it is, quote, a simple, end quote, matter. One thing I've learned is no matter how simple you think things should be, they always turn out to be a little less simple than advertised.
Again, it would be, as the research I would do would be a starting point, and then I'd want to coordinate with your public works and planning and police department staffs and make sure that the templates that other communities have used actually would work locally.
Well, my suggestion would be that you take a look and perhaps report back in 2 weeks or a month and say, here's what's involved, and hopefully you'll have a couple of good templates, and we can go from there. Does that meet your requirements, Mr. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And my understanding is that the weight of the truck in a lot of cases is what's used as the criteria, and so maybe a bus also it falls into a certain weight category so that it could be included. But that's my understanding, is the weight is the way that a lot of other cities have looked at it.
I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if Councilmember Ellsworth has examples that he's seen that he finds interesting, he could provide those to me.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, very good.
I just have one.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You might recall during our goal-setting session, one of the residents who spoke to us talked about buses in the neighborhoods, parking in the neighborhoods. I have a photo she sent me of a huge bus parked on Dean York Road. I mean, you got to ask yourself, what's that bus doing there?
And how's it
And
get out?
I see them. I see these kind of, I wouldn't call them quite bus size, but medium size tour vans, which now seem to spend their time driving around the neighborhoods or parking in the neighborhoods after they have deposited their passengers somewhere. So at the risk of overcomplicating the whole subject, I think we should look at this kind of bus and parking and traversing of residential neighborhoods as well.
Well, that was called out the other night to this party, and there was a tour bus loading and unloading in a neighborhood.
Where was it, roughly?
It was on Spring and Allen, and
You really are a state.
I guess.
But I think
that's way down the other end.
I think that is an issue. The bus thing is an issue, and I think people's residential area suddenly becoming somehow a commercial area due to this is an aspect of it, and it complicates it a little bit, but it is an aspect.
Maybe these guys would help us pay for a parking lot if we gave them a place to go park instead of parking in our residential neighborhoods.
Okay.
I'm done.
I think we've covered that, so thank you, everybody. The meeting stands adjourned, and thanks, everybody, for sticking it out this long.